we can.
That's over here, Miss Liv was sitting there.
So at this time, I think based on what John said, this is a continuation of our meeting from last night. So at this time, one of our board members cannot be here. Tommy, due to, I think, the incident that happened to his son-in-law, he has to be at work. So John says, well, I think we have to take a vote at this time to excuse him from the continuation. So I'll entertain a motion that we excuse Mr. Cade from attendance at this meeting.
Make a motion to attend Mr. Cade from attending this continuation.
Okay.
Excuse, I second.
A motion second. All in favor, so I'm saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Very good.
Everything okay within the family?
Yeah, I don't know if you knew Jeff, his son-in-law.
Broke his foot or something?
Well, he got. I'm not trying to laugh about it, but don't get me wrong. But he basically got ran over by a golf cart.
Right.
He was trying to. It was out of control. He was trying to stop it, and he suffered some fairly severe injuries.
So he had his mother with him?
It was his mother that was in it, and
It ran over. Mother was driving that
and the mother was
golf cart.
driving it, and it went out of control. And Jeff was trying to stop it, or whatever, and it ran over him. And he's got. Yeah. I think he suffered some injuries to his leg, and
He had it in a cast.
had a cast, and he's had an infection. It's turned out to be fairly severe. So bless his heart. We go from there. So other than that, we're just going to turn it over. As y'all know, we're here. Mr. Campbell has come over. He's graced us with his presence and his knowledge, which we're very thankful for. And today he's going to be bringing, I think, John, we're talking about legislative updates. And then also we're going to include some ethics training that Chris will be doing. We got talking about, I think, Nancy, I forgot she had hers, Gary, but since Stephanie is reelected, it wouldn't hurt us. She needs to get hers in. So this will kind of kill two birds with one stone.
Don't take that personal.
And I can't.
You haven't been unethical.
At times, correct.
And when we're done, you will have your 2 hours of editing.
You will be straight.
You'll be able to attest to that.
I know, and I have got to go back and check on my job after a while too. But anyway, I'm sure we'll get it close.
Okay, Jim.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the thank you that goes to you folks. This is the best part of the job. As John and I will tell you, when we're with the board, we don't have to deal with other lawyers. And that's a nice place to be. But I do enjoy this more than anything else with the job. It's a time that we can all kind of slow down and think through some things and think big picture and how we interact with each other and kind of how we operate as a board. And I always think that a big part of ethics is just kind of revisiting those roles and talking about the role of the board versus the role of the superintendent, and how can you support your superintendent, and how can you project to all of your constituents, your parents, your family, your school family, that you are competent as a school system and as a board. And I think the way you handle complaints and problems and things, you're going to have complaints, you're going to have problems, you're going to have controversies. That comes with the territory. It's all in how you handle it and not what happens to you kind of in life. So to me, a big part of ethics is always talking about that issue. So what we're going to do this afternoon is stay real informal. John and I are going to kind of, mutt and Jeff it, however you want to straighten it in and comic relief, and we'll alternate.
We'll let you decide who's in.
Yeah, exactly. We'll let you make up your own mind. But we're going to work through the ethics part so that we make sure that Stephanie's got that, and then we're also going to look at some new legislation and talk about some other issues. But this is also just a great opportunity to discuss things. If you've got things that aren't covered or that we don't bring up and you want to talk about them, we can certainly do that too as we work through that. But where I'd like to start is just kind of reminding, this is what we want. I mean, we don't want a board that necessarily all agrees with each other, but we want a board that works well together. And at the basis of ethics,
Did you see the smile she gave me? The truth comes out very quickly.
I thought we did pretty good the other two.
Well together.
Yeah, and of course, working well together does not mean that y'all vote together. It does not mean you all agree. It does not mean that everything, but again, it's in the process, and it's kind of in the way it's handled. The one person that you look to is your superintendent. And I've often called this relationship an hourglass. If you think of an hourglass with the sand at the top, flowing at the bottom, and the pinch in the middle, you at the board are at the top of that hourglass. And you're looking to the superintendent as your CEO. And he is your CEO. He is your paid employee to take care of it. You know, think about how wonderful it would be in your private life if you had a superintendent that you could call for your home insurance, your beach vacation, your child's math homework, whatever it is, and say, hey, take care of this. You know, put your people on it. Well, you have that as a school board member, and it is huge. When somebody calls you and vents to you for 25 minutes, and at the end of that phone conversation, you're thinking to yourself, my God, we are not doing things right in Macon County. The next phone call, and you all know this, is to the superintendent to say, get to the bottom of this. The one thing that you can expect, and that Dr. Baldwin wants you to expect, is results. He wants you to come to him with problems so that he can look into it, and that he's got a staff, and that he can get you the right answers. And I often say to people, it's up to you. You know, we're attorneys, we just get it to be looked into and taken seriously. You can make that promise. When somebody calls you or stops you in the grocery store and you're thinking to yourself, my goodness, this is something that needs to be looked into, you can say, I can promise you this will be looked into. And then the next phone call should be to the superintendent to kind of do that. Now, as we move to the bottom of the hourglass, this is where I say, take a moment and love your superintendent. Reach out, hug him, pat him on the back. You know, he knows you folks, right?
Yeah.
Now look what's below him though, everybody else. And when I say everybody else, I mean everybody else. Students, parents, local officials, media, everybody is looking to the superintendent for their particular issue, their particular child, particular results. So while he is trying to make the board happy and keep you guys up there smiling with your thumbs up, he's also trying to deal with this huge logistical nightmare that is a school system. And it doesn't matter how big a school system is. The same issues that happen in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system happen in the Macon County school system. It's just in Charlotte-Meck they have 48 people to deal with, and in Macon County there's one person to deal with those same issues. So, there are economies of scale and there are issues that every school district has to deal with, regardless of how big it is. So remember this, and what I just ask you to remember is anytime this group at the bottom thinks that they can go around the superintendent and get what they want, this dynamic breaks down. This dynamic breaks down and your ability to be effective starts breaking down. When people know that if they come to you, it's going to go to the superintendent, they'll start calling the superintendent. I mean, it's amazing to me every year how many superintendents tell me that their phone doesn't ring. You know, I don't know if people are afraid to call the superintendent. Maybe a little different here because you're a little bit more of a known quantity than somebody coming in from somewhere else. But a lot of times the superintendent will say, the board members get 85 more phone calls than I do. Well, I think there's a reason for that. If I'm a voter, who did I vote for? I voted for you guys. I didn't vote for everybody. So I'm gonna call you. But I think when you radio to people, you listen to them and tell them, I'm going to get this to the superintendent, I promise you, we're going to look into it. I think you really build the effectiveness of your school system and you make it look like a well-oiled machine. The superintendent should never surprise you guys, right? I mean, the worst thing in the world that can happen is that you learn about something for the first time at a board meeting. And the superintendent has not given anybody something serious, something that you didn't know that the administration was looking into. I'm not talking about routine matters, but serious matters. Well, pay the superintendent that same courtesy. Don't spring anything on him at a board meeting or somewhere else. Ask yourself a simple question. If I was superintendent, would I want to know this? Would I want to know this and be prepared and be ready? And please give the superintendent a heads up on anything that you think about in that respect. So again, the issue doesn't matter. I mean, you can funnel through this diagram any issue in the world, from sex education to gun control to religion in the schools to anything you can think of. If you will handle it the same way each time, and if you will ask for administrative recommendations before you act, I think you make better decisions. And I think one of the best things the board can do when faced with a critical issue, if you've got time, if you don't have to make a decision on the spot, is to put it back to your administration and ask them to research it, look into it, and come back to you with a recommendation. Why would you not? I mean, really think about that. Y'all have opinions and you've got great ideas, but if you've got an entire staff, why would you not want them to spend time looking into it, researching it, and coming back to you with some ideas and some alternatives? So I just think that works really well in terms of having that kind of approach. The other thing too is remember that the superintendent doesn't always know what you know. And there's two important points about that. Number one is don't assume that just because you know about it, he knows about it. So if you're at a ball game or you're at the grocery store at church and you hear something that concerns you, make that courtesy phone call to the superintendent to make sure he knows. Don't just assume that he might know it. The other thing is when you find out about it, sometimes you'll say to yourself, well, why haven't I been called? Why didn't I know about that? Why hasn't Dr. Baldwin picked up the phone and let me know? Again, he may not know what you know. I mean, sometimes things come out of left field. I'll give you a real simple, real-life example. Down in Rutherford County, they had an 11 o'clock news footage on the Fox channel out of South Carolina saying that one of their middle schools had outlaw hugging, that a child had come back from cancer treatment, and that all of his classmates were told that they could not hug him or they would be suspended from school. They had footage of the school. They had a quote from the school system that they enforce their no affection policy, and they had, of course, an interview with the mom. You know how they put that story together? They took stock footage of the school that they had from some other story. They did an in the station interview with the mama, and they called the secretary. They called Renee and said, what is your policy on inappropriate touching at schools? And Renee said, we don't allow inappropriate touching at schools. And they said, thank you very much. And they ran an 11 o'clock story at the school. They didn't talk to the principal. They didn't talk to the superintendent. They didn't talk to anybody. It was just baseline, dirt poor journalism. And the board asked for a formal apology and a retraction. But there's an example where you're sitting at home and all of a sudden Macon County Schools is the lead story. If you're hopping mad because you didn't get a phone call from your super, he may not have known. So, you know, cut him some slack until you're able to hear from him or talk to him about an issue. But, you know, that funnel comes with a lot of responsibility. Pay him the respect of giving him the ability to act and to look into things before you make any decisions as a board. Chris, any thoughts about that?
No, so I'm just glad we don't have media like that in Macon County.
Yeah, exactly, because that was not journalism. You know. Good, and I think, you know, we've talked about this a lot from time to time. This is what I want to avoid. You know, this is Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans, and you know, this is what we want to avoid. And boards have gone here. Boards in Western North Carolina have gone here on occasion. I think, you know, well documented and well known. And boards down east, and certainly the Wake County board has had its issues. But how in the world are parents supposed to have confidence that their kids are going to be educated if the board is not even functioning as a group of intelligent adults? You know, it's not whether you agree. You're not supposed to agree. That's the reason we all live in this country. I had a board chairman one time participate and contribute to a lawsuit against the school system. And I was asked, well, isn't that a violation of ethics or something else? I said, no, this is the United States of America. If the chairman doesn't like what the board's doing, he can show it with his wallet, he can show it in the streets, he can show it with editorials. You know, you have your voice, and you're never going to lose that. So certainly working together, I think is something to keep in mind.
That said, please don't do that.
Can we digress just for a second, Chris, and ask your opinion? I read in the paper about, I think it's the Buncombe County Board, where they took an unprecedented action. What exactly did they do?
With the censure policy?
With the censure.
Right. Well,
what that was and
Of a
was it
board
really?
member, censoring.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lady board member.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Right.
What happened in Buncombe County is, you know, first of all, as to censure, censure is as old as the common law. All censure means is we, the majority, do not approve of that conduct. You could have a censure in any board meeting. Someone could raise their hand and say, I move that we censure board member Henning. Second discussion, and he can find himself censured. I'll give you a clear example. There was a mayor, I think down east a bit, I think east of Charlotte, who was accused of buying alcohol with city money. She was censured by her board for that conduct.
Your mayor was censured by his board.
Okay. So
Has
that's
happened.
For
happened.
the Cherokee situation.
Yes.
The McQuassee situation.
Okay, so that's the most important thing to remember is that censure just means conduct. Well, what the Buncombe County Board wanted to do is, one of the board members wanted to look at a censure policy so that there was an orderly process. And what the media has been reporting is there's one board member who often is a minority, oh, this is a policy designed to stifle speech. It's not. I mean, the majority doesn't need a censure policy. It's the majority. You know, if a minority board member, you don't use it for speech. You use it for conduct. Now, you can use it for speech, but it would be speech that is inappropriate, offensive kind of things. What the policy did, though, and this was reported on, but I think kind of lost, is the policy created an orderly process by which if you believe a board member should be censured, you have to ask the chairman to put it on the agenda. Once it's on the agenda, there has to be advance notice to the board member that is the subject of censure. They have an opportunity to respond if they want. It has to receive a second at the meeting to even be discussed. And then to be passed, it has to have a 2/3 majority of the board. Well, common law censure is just a majority of the board to respond and making it a supermajority vote. So the board wanted to look at a policy and they just passed it.
So if they didn't spend it, try to spend it beyond what you're describing?
No.
Good.
No.
So I thought they were trying to explore unprecedented waters and maybe even expand it a little bit beyond that. I was a little unclear what they were doing.
Right, the policy talks about conduct that is negative to the board, to the school system. But again, that's always been the case with censure. When people ask the question, well, isn't censure subjective? Yes, it's the opinion of the majority that your conduct is inappropriate. You know, so that's why I think you got to be careful making a bigger deal out of censure. You can't remove a board member and there are no penal actions.
When the town of Franklin went through that, I found that a lot of people were hung up on the way that the word censure sounds like a terrible offense. You know, it sounds like a criminal action or something.
Right.
So, you know, it just sounds ominous, and it really is just, it's just an opinion of the board.
And censure also sounds a whole lot like censor. And a lot of people are saying, oh, this is to censor. This is a censorship policy to stop someone who might be in the majority from expressing their views, and quite to the contrary.
Okay. I just wondered, it looked like they were trying to explore the boundaries of what they could or couldn't do, and I'm just curious to know. Gary, did you?
Now, you use two different spellings of censor? Okay, that's where I got off.
Censure and censor.
So, two different spellings.
Okay. I'm sorry.
It was not a censor policy, it was a censure.
I got off track, so I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
That's important, those two. Because I was thinking of the censor, the free speech, the First Amendment, but that's not what you're saying.
That's exactly right.
Words matter.
Yeah, words matter. In fact, at the meeting, I had to point that out. I said, let's all keep in mind that we're not talking about censorship, we're talking about censure. Now, folks will say, again, everyone's entitled to an opinion. They will say, well, when you censure a board member, aren't you trying to stifle their speech? Well, if you censure them for speech, by definition, yes, you're saying the speech is inappropriate. So let me give you two examples. One where a board member says, I disagree with the way we do our budget, and I think we should do it a different way. Motion to censure that. Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. And then second of all, yes, you're trying to stop the board member from expressing their views on the budget. That just makes no sense. But if that same board member were to say some things that were extremely offensive, and that the entire board agreed that that was extremely offensive and totally inappropriate, the board members refusing to apologize for those statements, the board can say, we're going to censure you because we want to distance ourselves formally from the offensive remark, not your opinion on school matters, but those offensive remarks that you made, or your DWI. We're going to censure you for your DWI because we want to distance ourselves from that offense.
Is that a difference between a U and a O in the spelling? Okay.
All right. All right, ethics, first of all, there's a law that says you need to, and we'll run through that real quick.
Is this part of the training? We want her to pay attention.
Now it's time for Stephanie to pay attention. That's right. Okay, ethics. This is from Fleming Bell, professor at the School of Government, and I think this is wonderful. And I'd like to spend just a few minutes on this slide because we're going to talk about some specific ethics laws and run through those. But This really says it all as far as I'm concerned. If you were to stop somebody on the street and say, what does it mean to be an ethical member of the Macon County Board of Education? I think this is what people would tell you. Trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, accountability, fairness, caring, and civic virtue and citizenship. I think that is what the man on the street and the average voter thinks of when they think of ethics. I think when they think of conflicts of interest, they think of self-dealing, money transactions, those types of things. But when I think you use the word ethics, I think this is what most people think. They want to feel good about their board members. And I give you another true story that I think really sums this up. When I was doing job interview phone calls for the superintendency in Henderson County, we did the research and I was calling references for one of the candidates. Well, one of the candidates was the former head of the State Board of Education in Mississippi, Tom Burnham. He was the state superintendent in Mississippi for years when he was working to come to Henderson County. Well, I called a former board member on the state board, because I had been told that he and Tom had vehemently disagreed on an issue. Well, I asked him about the issue, and I had to hold the phone out to hear, because you could tell he was still very upset with the issue. And he said, and that Tom Burnham did this and that and this and that, and when he was done, he said, and if you guys don't hire him, you are the craziest people on planet Earth. You will not find a kinder man, a more dedicated man, a harder worker, somebody who wants to do the right thing. I still think he's a damn fool for that decision, but you're a bigger fool if you don't hire him. Bingo. People out there may be so mad at you at a decision you made about their child or anybody else, but if you will carry yourselves in this way and take things seriously and listen to people and give them the respect that they deserve, then I think it makes a difference. We'll go into the specifics, but the first hearing I did in Macon County, we sat down and had dinner, and John may remember this, with the families that were appealing to the board before the board meeting. And I just thought that was wonderful. We all had dinner together because dinner had been prepared prior to the board meeting, and then we went out to hearing. Well, parents that came in hopping mad after a turkey, gravy, and green bean dinner, they were very nice and respectful. So my suggestion to you is if you've got a contentious meeting coming up, serve turkey and gravy before the meeting and invite everybody to come in. But I just thought that was a great model. Yeah, to go through that. So conflicts of interest, again, that's just remembering that you do serve in different roles in the community, in civic organizations, in the churches, as board members, and that you've always got to be mindful of how somebody might look at a conflict. And while it may not be a legal conflict of interest, it may be something in which you are interested. And I'm a big fan of just hitting that head on. If you think that people may whisper behind your backs that you did A, B, or C because you have some relationship, I'm a fan of, if you feel like you want to get it out on the minutes, get it out on the minutes in the meeting. And if, let's say, we're talking about some new policy, you can say, I want everyone to know that I also serve on this community board. We're talking about mental health or a contract maybe with mental health services for students, and I serve on a local board that provides those services. I'm still going to vote on this. I have a clear conscience, but I want everybody to know that I do have that relationship. I think if you ever feel like you don't want somebody to second guess you later, go ahead and get it on the minutes so that it's there and kind of get it out in the open so that people know about it. Public expectations of government officials. I think this is true too. Again, Fleming Bell, we're not going to take personal advantage because we're elected. And it's funny, I always smile when I say that because it's real hard to take personal advantage when you're a school board member. I mean, if y'all want to, make money on the side or have some shady deals, the school board is not the place to serve. So I'm yet to find anybody who came off the school board financially better off than when they went on the school board. It usually is the exact opposite. They usually can actually show it to you on the balance sheet too if they're a small business owner. Public officials should not show favoritism to a particular citizen at the expense of others, uphold values of honesty, impartiality, and fairness, and when acting as an official, act in the public interest in doing it instead of doing what's best for yourself, obviously. A couple of laws we always hit real quick just to make sure we're covered. Prohibition against benefiting from public contracts, misuse of confidential information, which again is difficult. And then the accepting gifts and favors, which can be a little dicey as long as you kind of know what the bottom line is, and we'll cover that real quick. Also bribery, obviously, and failure to discharge your duties. Interestingly, the failure to discharge your duties is the only statute under which a school board member can be removed from office. And it takes the DA to bring those charges and a judge to remove you from office. So school board members can only be removed in North Carolina through a criminal process, with the judge finding that you willfully, intentionally, and failed to discharge the duties of the office. I do not know of that ever happening in the state of North Carolina. I think if anyone ever committed conduct that rose to that level, they were probably smart enough to resign off the board before we got to that particular area. Prohibition number 1, school board members and system employees involved in making or administering contracts on behalf of the board may not derive a benefit from the contract. You are making contracts. You're approving contracts all the time. I think for me the question is not, are you coming to me if I'm involved in a contract? I'll give you a real simple example. I had a board member that on his own time was providing fish fries as a fundraiser for schools. He was going out, he was frying up the fish, he was doing the fundraiser for everybody. Well, the direct benefit does not mean profit. When you think of benefit, don't think of profit. Benefit means $1. Benefit means you get any kind of pecuniary reimbursement or money for what you do. So that when I told him there is not a district attorney on the planet that's going to prosecute you for doing fish fries, but I told him just to avoid any direct benefit, have the school buy everything. Because the school was reimbursing it. See, he was going out and buying everything. He was donating his time. So he wasn't making a profit, but the school was still cutting a check to a board member. And I said, hyper-technically, that's you receiving money from the schools. I mean, to avoid ever getting, other than that huge check you get for being board members, other than that, you obviously need to avoid any kind of direct benefit. So that's what he did. He just said to principals, you buy everything, I'll bring you the invoice, I'll go pick it all out, I'll bring you the invoice, you give me a school check, I'll even pick it up and donate all my time to do the fundraiser. So, that works out real well to avoid that direct benefit analysis. Prohibition number 2, a school board member or employee who derives any benefit, but who is not involved in making, shall not attempt to influence another in making or administering the contract. Again, I would just avoid situations where you're going to receive a benefit, with the exception that we'll talk about in a minute of communities such as yours that can take advantage of the exception that I know I've talked about before. In fact, I just had a county actually do it. Number 3, school board members may not solicit or receive any gift, favor, reward, service, promise, including a promise of future employment, in exchange for recommending or influencing or attempting to influence the award of a contract by the school board. That's your basic kickbacks that not punish you that. All right, let's go back into this prohibition against benefiting from contracts. First of all, making a contract means you participate in the development of specifications and terms or the award. You cannot simply decide not to vote to get around this. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to vote on that contract because I'm going to get a benefit from the contract. Administering it, again, means you oversee it or you have the authority to make decisions about the contract. And you do as a board a lot of times. You have decisions to make. Here's what I think the nub is of this direct benefit. So what is a direct benefit? First of all, it's when you, a covered employee, or your spouse has more than 10% ownership in the company that's party to the contract and gets any kind of income or commission from the contract or acquires any property. So we're going to hit the exceptions, but that's the test. And you have more than 10% ownership interest in whatever the enterprise is, are you going to get any income, commission whatsoever, and you acquire any property. Let's look at this scenario. Betty owns 100 shares of stock in Office Depot. Other than this, she has no connection with Office Depot. Is there a problem with the school system enters into a contract with Office Depot? No, because Betty's not a 10% owner of Office Depot. So no problem there. Number 2, you're employed as a car dealership, as a salesman. And before you were elected to the board, you got commission and you sold vehicles to the school system. You're now a board member. First of all, may the school system continue to buy cars from the ABC car dealership, the dealership, not you directly. Sure. You're just a salesman. You don't own more than 10%. Number 2, after you're sworn in, may you continue to receive commissions? No. That's a direct benefit, unless you use the small county exception. After you're sworn in, may your spouse, who is also a salesperson, receive a commission for selling vehicles through the school system. No, because the rule applies to you or your spouse, yes, in terms of getting money back. So we've answered all those. Is it possible for something to be legal or ethical and still be problematic? Is it legal, is it ethical? We've already talked about that. Ethics, I think, is what people think of more than they think of these illegal type things. So the prohibition does not apply to contracts with banks for public utilities. Okay? It also doesn't apply when the school board employs a spouse. The school board can't employ a spouse without it being a problem. It doesn't apply to condemnation. The school district's going to take your land, and that'll be real interesting to see how that plays out, but that's no problem. Relevant number 3 was that spouse, like I said, is an exception. Now here's the one, 15,000 population limit. Where is the population of Franklin right now? Right.
4,500 or less.
Not even close, right? You got plenty of time. You can, because you're in a small community, contract with a board member.
However, the board, when it adopted its ethics policy, decided not to avail itself of these exemptions. So we don't, this doesn't apply to us because you've chosen for it not to.
Right, and I think that's a good move. And I will tell you that if you ever get there and had to because you had no choice or something, there's a full process by which you've got to notify the public, you've got to post it, you have to have a resolution where everybody signs off. There's a whole bunch of hoops that have to be jumped through as part of that process.
And I really think that exception made a lot of sense when that, being below that population limit meant that there was one place you could buy a T-shirt with something printed on it in your county. We have a little thing called the internet now. It means, it just has rendered all that sort of useless.
Yeah, the John Deere tractor parts before the internet were the ones.
John, you don't live in Haven. We don't have that internet.
You don't have those internets. Well, you need to call Al Gore and personally bring you some internets. So, yeah. I think that we did. So we won't even worry about that. So, again, remember, it's a criminal offense if you violate any of the statute related to contracting and whatnot, and provides also, if you enter into such a contract as a board, it will be void. And here's an example where the Hyde County Board of Commissioners was required to return $270,000 that he received as board commissioner in payment for repairs and renovations that he performed on 2 government facilities. The board member must suffer the loss incident to the breach of the public duty. So if we do violate one of these, where's the money going to come from? It's going to come back to the school board, back to the public coffers.
If I remember this right, this was, there was no allowance made for his cost, whatever. The total amount he'd been compensated, he had to return the full amount.
A full contract amount,
Yes.
which meant he bought materials, he had to probably pay some workers or some subcontractors. He probably, this guy, maybe he didn't take out permits, he was supposed to buy permits and
Everything, right.
Yeah, everything. You're exactly right. So when they use the word suffer, he's definitely the one that suffers the problem. So. And Stephanie, John just reminded everybody, we do not have the exception by board policy where we can contract with a member. So no member should be contracting or receiving a direct benefit from the school system. I'll give you a simple example. I have a party store, okay, and I'm a board member, and the high school wants to come buy balloons and party favors from me. Should they do that? No. You're going to receive money from the school district. I think you keep it simple. While you're a board member, you don't get $1 from the school.
What about your family?
Or anybody, your spouse can. Now,
What about your child?
Your child can. And again, that's one of those things where you got to ask yourself the question, is this some balloons and party supplies and who cares? Or is this, $70,000 in equipment? To me, if it was $70,000 in equipment, even if the superintendent had the authority to do that, I, as a board member, may want that on the minutes of a public meeting. I may want to say, I want everyone to know that this district is buying for my son. Superintendent made the decision. I wasn't part of it, but the superintendent may want to say, this is the best vendor in the area. We did an informal bid process. They were the low bidder. You may want it on the public record so that people aren't out there saying behind your back, well, they just did that because it was a board member's son. Sometimes you are better off, Gary, addressing it in an open session if you think that it could be an issue later. But that doesn't apply to your extended family. This only applies to you and your spouse.
Okay, with CarQuest, are we gonna run up to the edge of this with an employee?
He's not a covered, I mean, we'll look closely at that before any, before the district commits to anything, but he's not a covered entity he's not making or administering the contract. We'll look very closely at that, but I don't think that's gonna be a problem.
Remember, Gary, this is pretty much what we're talking about specific to school board members.
I was gonna say,
right?
he's an
Yes.
employee too, it's a
Yeah.
different.
A little bit different creature as
Well,
an employee.
yeah, some of them do apply to employees too, and John's right, I think case by case you need to evaluate, and that's what
That's what we
you need to take
do.
a hard look at. That's exactly, those are the kind of questions you need to be asking. Is, to me, hindsight is not hard. Hindsight just means what questions are likely to come up later. And you can see people saying, why are you buying from an employee? You can see that coming up, because you never know what the trigger is, and I give you a simple example, and this obviously has nothing to do with this employee, but let's say you bought from an employee, and then let's say you find out that that employee is part of some kind of racketeering scam in the county or whatnot. All of a sudden, the fact that you bought from the employee came to light, not because anybody thought it was a bad idea, but because of something the employee did, and suddenly that's an issue. Things become issues for the weirdest reasons sometimes. So I think you do need to be asking those questions ahead of time, just how would that work?
And again, we are addressing those questions, but I also don't know that there's any direct benefit. And that's we need to have the agreement that they are going to ask us to enter into for that purpose. But we'll be keeping those questions in mind.
It's an excellent example, one that can sneak in.
I think, and I'm speaking in a thought, and I shouldn't be probably. If that person works for us, who has ownership in that, I think the little stink may come out of the parents who wanted him for the coach, but we went to the other side. You follow me? You've got a group that wants this person as a coach. Recommendation was, we went to another person. So that may unravel something, and you just have to read between the lines.
Again, it's odd sometimes how things become an issue. They don't become an issue for the reason that's
It has nothing to do
straightforward.
with it.
Yeah,
It's
oh, yeah.
a coaching thing there as far as it may.
You already said, some people will say that as a trade-off.
No, I think what I'm saying, that may cause this non-issue to come to be an issue, is because somebody's going to say, well, I'm upset because I didn't choose him for a coach, or because I chose the other person, and that may inflame something.
Well, I think the way we're approaching it, Gary, I'll give you my opinion. The way we're approaching it, it's not gonna, anything's gonna be hidden, so from the very get-go, we have to have the contract that John's talking about, to review totally and look at it, and then we're not gonna try to hide it. I mean, I think what we'll do is very bluntly, it'll be one of the items in the public, on our, not an open session, and we can discuss all the benefits and make sure everybody knows it.
Like Dr. Baldwin said last night, the board will address that in open session, and there will be no hiding the ball.
I think Ms. Cantrell's not in here. When I was at the high school, Napa played a big part in our auto mechanics, machinery and stuff. If I'm working for Napa and I'm providing machinery, a lot of that stuff costs quite a bit of money.
I don't remember getting machinery from, we got no parts from.
Yeah, we had, I believe there was some kind of machine that we, one of our former students, we got some kind of upgrade. I'd hate to see them to turn that off, turn that little bit of a fountain off. That helps. Okay, that's just thought, should be quiet.
Now, and addressing it in open session is the way to do it, so that people can't speculate after the fact as to what a decision might be made too. And that, the superintendent's report, by the way, is a great time to address things. If y'all don't need to discuss them, but they need to just be out on the public record, that's a wonderful time, Dr. Baldwin, for you to say as part of your superintendent's report. And let me also notify the public that we recently did X, Y, and Z, and this was the reason for it. Didn't want people wondering why we did what we did. And, if y'all don't need to discuss it, but you would appreciate him clarifying it publicly, let him know. I mean, that's a great example, is to pick up the phone and call your chairman, call your superintendent and say, hey, I would, as a board member out in Nantahala, I'd appreciate a public explanation of so-and-so, because I'm hearing some things, and I'd like to publicly put that to rest. And a lot of boards and superintendents, more and more, because school boards are becoming more and more of the place where there's all kind of intrigue, and newspapers are selling themselves based on school boards these days. So sometimes the superintendent's got to get out in front with some issues and say, let me explain this. And make sure, obviously, he's going to want to make sure you want him to explain it properly. That's a great time to do it. It really is. This is the one, too, that I think is pretty straightforward, and that is any kind of gifts or favors from contractors or potential contractors from the board. Contractors are prohibited from giving gifts or favors to board members and to covered employees. My rule is straightforward. If anybody wants your business or has your business as a school board, don't take anything from it. Just don't take anything from it. Keep it real simple. If the guy who has the copy of contract wants you to come down and play golf with him somewhere, go play golf. Pay for your own cart, pay for your own green fees, pay for your own, buy him lunch at the golf. Be able to say that you do not take a dollar from anybody who wants to do business with the school district, or that that's their primary motivation. Any exception that you would say to me, well, come on, common sense, is in the law. I'll give you the prime one. Family and best friends. If you and I have been friends for years and we've exchanged, gifts at Christmas, we can continue to do that. You can accept anything in the world you want from a family member, no matter how much business they might do with the school district. That exception is in the law. It is, folks, that the reason for the relationship is the school business. I had a superintendent call me a few years ago and say, I've got a doctor in town who provides us with athletic trainers for football games. And as everybody knows, that's probably the best way for a physical therapy, sports, medicine shop to get patients, is to actually have their people doing the Friday night football games. There's a lot of goodwill that comes back from that, and a lot of potential patients. He wants me to jump on his private plane and fly to an SEC football game and sit in the president's box and eat shrimp cocktail. And I love the superintendent to death. You may even know, Chris may have an idea what I'm talking about when I tell you. He said, the only reason I'm calling you is so that I can tell him that the school board attorney told me no. He said, I know I can't do it, but he's being so generous that I want you to tell me no so I can tell him you told me no. And I said, no. And he said, thank you very much. And we went first. So,
I'd have went and then called you.
Exactly. Well, let me tell you how simple this is. What's the hindsight? A couple of years later, they put the whole sports medicine situation with athletic trainers out to a bid because it got so cutthroat and so competitive. Mission Hospital got in the game, a bunch of private providers got in the game. So the school district said, we're not paying anything for this, it's a free service, but we're still going to bid it out as an RFQ, and we're going to select trainers to avoid all this controversy. Well, what if he had taken that trip the year before they decided to bid it out? Just stick a fork in it. There's no way he could have been part of that process or made a recommendation that anybody would have thought if he had recommended that outfit would have been biased after taking the trip. So it's just, and there are exceptions. I'll give you another one. Mark Evans down in Mooresville Grady. Mark has been on the forefront of laptop one-on-one initiatives. He has gotten invitations all around the country to come speak. They're paying his expenses. This is Apple. These are private corporations saying, come to this conference, we'll pay your lodging, we'll pay your expenses, we'll pay everything else. The way we got around that, because that's a direct benefit to him with a vendor, was the Board of Education met in an open session, said this is fabulous. For the Mooresville graded superintendent to be the keynote speaker in California for an Apple Technology Conference that is for school boards, we are declaring that this is an official school board function, that we will pay reasonable travel. He's going to have to stay in the Hampton Inn. He's not going to be able to stay at the Sheraton by the river. But Apple can reimburse us as a school system. They're not going to pay a dime to our superintendent. We're going to pay for it. And if Apple wants to reimburse us, the institution, that's fine. That's not a violation of law. And that's the way we got around that, because the board was in favor of it. So I think those are good examples to remember. John and I are vendors. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're on it.
Is that where you? Yeah. We don't let us take you out to lunch or dinner. Don't let any other law firm take you out to lunch or dinner.
Especially that.
The old thing in Greensboro, or at the school board's meeting, the architect firm would load everybody on buses and take them to casino night. Well, Allison Schaefer, who I love to death, was pulling her hair out over that, and I would have too, because she had people saying to her, well, is this a violation of ethics or not? So I think what they ended up doing was they actually made that part of the conference. They made it in a conference event sponsored by this particular group, and that was a great way to handle it, so that people didn't feel like they were doing something illegal. Criminal laws only apply in the state of North Carolina. If you violate a criminal law outside the state of North Carolina, I think there's a real question of whether you created a criminal act, but if I was a board member, I wouldn't rely on that. I would conduct if I went out to San Francisco, I also would not accept dinners and cruises and other things from vendors. And I'll tell you, with all due respect to this, the fellow profession, the architects are the worst, because they don't know about this law or they don't care, and they're always trying to take boards out to steakhouses and provide stuff. So just be careful.
Isn't there a number that's okay, like 10?
There's a gift of nominal value you can accept. And that's like I don't know if there may be a slide on that.
What I've said there is, again, if it's part of some kind of a function, you're fine. If these are gifts sitting on a table at a school board's meeting, school boards association function, they've been provided to other people, you're fine. It's when that firm takes you out for a private dinner that I think you cross that line. If I brought koozies, if I brought drink koozies to you right now, it's in Campbell Shatley, that's nominal, no DA's gonna care about it.
I've had people come in with a bundle of pens like this big that had their logo on them and cost about a half a cent a piece, and they go around and hand them out to board members, and they would give them to anybody else who wanted one. That's fine. Don't give a second thought to that. That's a gift of nominal value.
Here are the exceptions. Let's talk about it. Gifts and honorariums for participating in meetings. These are official meetings. So, if you went down and spoke spoke in Greensboro, if you spoke to a group as a school board member and they gave you a gift basket, a jar of honey, that's not a problem. You're actually participating in the meeting. It's an official meeting. I think that the more it's related to your school board functions, that's fine. You can't get cute with this. Nobody's going to believe that a meeting with or that a dinner with an architect firm was an official meeting somehow. If it's going to be an official meeting, you make it an official meeting. And you invite the public, you invite the press, and you invite everybody else. And you tell the architecture firm they better have enough Omaha steaks for everybody, including the press. John's exactly right. If we're going to do this, let's do it, and let's have it open to anybody who walks through the door. Advertising items, souvenirs of nominal value. That's exactly what we're talking about. The advertising, T-shirts, hats, that kind of stuff, we're not going to worry about. Meals furnished at banquets is an exception. Donations to professional organizations to defray meeting expenses of government employees and members of that organization. That's more for the entity. In other words, John's law firm could sponsor a RESA meeting. And I think when y'all been to RESA meetings, sometimes the lunch is provided by so-and-so, that's fine. Because that's somebody defraying the cost of the official meeting. It's not an individual gift to an individual school board member, so that's fine. Customary gifts and favors between employees or officers and their friends, relatives, spouses, minor children, members of their household, where it's clear that the relationship, rather than business, is that individual relationship. That's the motivating factor. Again, just because somebody is doing business doesn't mean that you can't continue to interact with friends and family and provide gifts with friends and family. So that's not a problem. The gifts permitted to legislators were bootstrapped a few years ago into the exceptions. So now what the exceptions for legislative employees and state agencies also are exceptions for you folks. And that is food or beverage for immediate consumption in connection with a public event. Exactly what John was talking about. This is something available to the public. If there's a spread of food, help yourself. I had a superintendent one time say he told all his mentees, if you can put it in your stomach and take it with you from a meeting, you're fine. And I think that's a good rule of thumb. If it's a public meeting, if it's available, go ahead and have that. Informational materials, obviously, that's fine. Reasonable actual expenses for attending an educational meeting, speaking at a meeting, or attending an organizational meeting at which your official organization is a member. So obviously, school boards association meetings are covered there. Plaques, non-monetary mementos, gifts accepted on behalf of the school system for the benefit of the school system. I've had school board members who felt like something they got in good faith they didn't want to keep, so they gave it to the board. And they alleviated any possible concern by giving it to the school board. In other words, a vendor gives you 4 rounds of golf at a real nice golf course. Well, turn around and immediately give it to the foundation or the PTO to auction off at the silent auction. Immediately say, I can't accept it, but I'm going to give it to the PTO and tell them, it came from you, so you'll still get credit. That's one way to take a gift and still have the benefit to your school system without you accepting it as a school board member. So you can do that too. And watch the face of the vendor when you tell them you're now going to give it to the PTO. So anything made available or distributed to the public, gifts from family members, again, these are additional, so that's why they were paying. These are the legislative exceptions. And gifts given as part of a business, civic, religious, fraternal, personal, commercial relationship, if not related to the public service, and not given for the purpose of lobbying whatsoever. Again, tickets pay face value. I mean, tickets are face value. I don't, personally, and I don't think the DA would have a problem that these tickets, could have been scalped for a higher price. I mean, that's illegal. So pay the face value. If you're lucky enough to have somebody offer you some tickets to a good sporting event, pay the face value. Just don't accept them for free. If there's somebody where the basis of that relationship is school board business or the potential of school board business, and those things work out. Food and beverage, again, immediate consumption, we've covered that. It is a crime. It's a class 1 misdemeanor. And it cannot be claimed as a tax deduction in addition. The Attorney General interpreted the statute and said that it includes your board attorney or other independent contractors back in 1993. If you want to know how the world works, this is how the world works, okay? The Nash County Superintendent, or Board Attorney, Wardlaw Lamar, his board was being wined and dined by a law firm which will remain nameless. So Wardlaw picked up the phone and called his college roommate, Eddie Spees, North Carolina Deputy Attorney General, and said, Eddie, they're trying to steal my client. I need an opinion. Eddie said, I'll get you an opinion. They can't do that. So that's how this opinion came out, but it is a straightforward, clear opinion. No attorneys, architects, other professional service providers cannot take you guys out to a steakhouse and pay for your dinner. So, pretty straightforward stuff.
Say that again, now the architect they
cannot take the board out and buy you dinner. Do not let an architecture firm in Greensboro take the board out and pay for your dinner. Because the reason they're wanting to take you out to dinner is to get your business. And that is not a public meeting, and it doesn't fit in any exceptions whatsoever.
Now when we talk about this ethics training, if you serve on another trustee board, is this new?
Are you on the community college board?
Yes.
These rules are pretty much coherent between the two. I would say 90% are the same.
There's a little bit of difference.
There's a little bit of difference with some of those. Again, the question is it an official meeting or not? But basically the same laws about individual service providers taking you out for a fancy dinner apply to both. So if you got any concerns about the community college rules, check with your attorney there, who may be me, so you can call me later. We can talk about that later. Yeah, if you've got a concern about it, let's talk.
We're going through that architectural improvement plans and stuff right at the moment. Okay. forget
Yeah,
it.
let's talk about that after the meeting, because there are official meetings of the board in which a meal is served, and that's okay. But then there's, well, we need to talk about, some of the components, let's just do it over a meal. Well, again, the board members should be paying for their own meal.
Okay.
That's the way to, go out to dinner, go to Chez Rousseau, go to the fanciest restaurants you want, but pick up your own meal. Is what we're gonna see. So somebody can't claim later that you're not willing to hold the architect's feet to the fire on this contract because that architect bought you a $300 steak dinner and, bought 18 bottles of wine. We really know what's going on with you board members. That's kind of where that can come up. Bribery, I don't think we have much to worry about. If people are bribing you folks on the Macon County Board of Education, I think that person's got bigger issues. But it could happen. Just remember, bribery is a felony. And things of value now include campaign contributions too. So if you can link the campaign contribution. And this was the statute I talked about. It's a misdemeanor for you to omit, neglect, or refuse to perform the duties of your office with the sanction of removal from office. But the neglect, that standard is not that low. It's not that you just omitted to do something. You actually have to have some willfulness and some intent for it to be criminal. And remember, DAs have this wonderful thing called prosecutorial discretion. And a DA is not going to take on removal of a school board member unless the DA feels like you did something that you need to be removed for. So, an error in judgment or an omission is not going to get you removed from office. Misconduct is going to get you.
Attendance can, though, if you're not attending the meetings.
If you refuse to come to meetings, it could get to that. Yeah. I think the board, would be pretty diligent in letting you know, that you got to start coming to the meetings, or we're going to have to say something to the DA. I think a lot of things would happen before it would get to the DA's place, but it could.
But Tommy Cave's not getting picked up right now.
Yeah.
He's not getting handed up this one.
Take care of him.
That does bring me an interesting question, though. If you had a board member basically as a protest, you made a decision that he or she just refused, and that's their way of protesting the decision by the board, just refusing to come to meetings.
I think if a board member sat out in one meeting,
I'm talking about, say, suddenly after a year, he hasn't shown up.
I think if the board member just stopped coming to meetings, I think you would have to take it on. Yep. And there again, publicly, and the statutes are clear, you cannot talk about board members behind closed doors. It has to be out here. So, that's one of those times I think the board would say, we are issuing a formal request to this board member to come home. And if the board member doesn't come back, we're letting the board member and the public know that we'll be notifying the DA this board member is to go through the meetings. This is a good place to stop if the food's here and get the food. And I'm happy to keep on going. If y'all want to take a short food break, but I'm also happy to keep going and get you out of here. I want to be sensitive to your time because I know you've got other things you need to get to. So I'm happy for you to get a plate of food and come on back if that's what y'all like to do.
When we do that, we can go ahead and combine.
I'm serious about the way they've been treated. It will come to you as a board. And if they're calling you at home and bugging you and trying to get other people to call you, then all they're trying to do is avoid the process. Anybody who's serious has the right to come to the Board of Education pretty much in just about any circumstance, with the exception of trivial things. If the teacher had a classroom moved and didn't like it, maybe that wouldn't qualify as one of their things. But anything of a serious nature is going to make it to the board. Dismissal, demotion, career teachers while we still have them, and we'll talk about that. But the bigger point is everybody's going to be in a contract. So a contract says you cannot be terminated without a board hearing. Then the statute goes on to say if you're non-renewed, in some circumstances you get a board hearing. In some circumstances, the board may grant a hearing. And we're going to have to deal with that. We're not going to deal with it today. I'm just letting you know we're going to have to look at the new laws and have some discussion and provide some policies because all this will matter beginning next year. But when it comes to non-renewing contracts, sometimes there can be board hearings for the decision not to renew that particular person. But anybody who's terminated in the middle of the contract will have to come to you for the hearing. Most of you have heard about the hearing officer or review officer process where the employee can go to the hearing officer to actually have a little mini trial, and then it would come back to the board for final decision. The legislature has done away with that for non-career status employees completely. So all hearings now come directly to the board. Until 2018, any teacher that keeps their tenure can still go to a hearing officer. So there's still a chance you could have a hearing officer. But between now and 2018, any contract employee, if Dr. Baldwin recommends they be terminated and they're going to fight it, it's going to come to you for the full-blown hearing. That means if you have one, that means you're going to be the fact finder. You're going to have the full-blown hearing. You'll have the attorneys, you'll have the court reporter, you'll have live witnesses to be heard if it comes to that stage. Recommendations, like I said, not to renew, suspension and expulsion of students. As you know, those come to you. Student admission and assignment appeals, and appeals from any final administrative decision under that statute. So the thing to remember is if somebody's calling you and saying that they're not being treated fairly, then you need to remind them that there is an appeals process and that they need to, and if the problem they're having is with Dr. Baldwin, refer them to John. They call Mr. Henning and inquire with him about the appeals process. It's one of the things the school board attorney will do is make sure the employee knows what the appeals process is. John will not represent them, he will not give them legal advice, but he will say you might want to read this policy and go get your lawyer. So that we can make things come appropriately. But that's just a reminder that things really don't happen without coming to you.
In that arena, I think it's really important, and we talk about this a lot, that you've gotten a visual representation of what we talk about leaving a separation between what the employment process is with the superintendent handling it and where you are up here. If somebody tries to complain and goes around your superintendent, it is crucially important to say the superintendent's going to handle it. It'll come back to us in the form of a hearing, and that's why I can't be involved in this matter. So keep that hourglass shape in mind when that situation comes up.
And especially if it's the employee. You know, if it's the employee saying to you, I'm being railroaded, I'm being done wrong, then you need to say, look, I'm the judge and jury. It's like you picking up the phone and calling the judge and jury. I can't have this conversation with you. If you feel like you're being done wrong, there's an appeals process. You need to call the board attorney. And the board attorney will point you in the direction you need to go. You need to call your NCAE representative. If they're a member of NCAE, you need to call somebody else. They know that. They know all that. They know there's an appeals process. They've probably already talked to their NCAE rep. They may even have talked to an NCAE attorney. They're calling you to try to find out if they should fight. You know, that's the reason they called you, is they're hoping to get a signal from you as to whether or not you'll do anything for them or whether or not you'll be a potential ally for them. So when you just route them back to the process, then you do everybody a favor, including yourself. When it comes to a hearing, obviously the basis of you not getting involved, like John said, is the 14th Amendment. Anybody who comes before a tribunal to be heard deserves an impartial decision. And that's what the 14th Amendment is all about. In the school context, we're talking about dismissals, we're talking about dismissals of contract employees, suspension and expulsion of students. Now, what our North Carolina Supreme Court has said, though, is that you do have to be fair and impartial, but that knowledge of preconceptions and other things, you don't need to be basing your decisions on preconceptions. You need to be basing them on evidence that's presented at a hearing, not things you may feel. But for my purposes, I think that, let's see if we've got the slide in here. No, he doesn't. I'm sorry. I need to add this slide. The slide that I think is more important, this stuff's straightforward. You can't get involved and also be an impartial juror. You can't investigate yourself. You can't call people. You can't look into the facts. You can't take witness statements. You can't meet with people and then claim, oh, now I can be impartial. That's like you show up for a jury trial and juror number 7 says, I've met with the experts. I've heard what they've had to say. I know the plaintiff. I was there the day the accident happened and I saw it. But I can sit here and be an impartial juror. You know, I can sit here and listen to the case. So don't get involved. What I think is more important, though, is the Supreme Court said, when the Crump case went up to the Supreme Court, you have multiple hats that you wear. You're going to know that Chris Campbell has been a problem employee for years. That's okay. You may have even voted on removing something or not removing something from our personnel file. I may have grieved an evaluation at some point, and now Dr. Baldwin is coming to you asking to have you terminated. Well, just because you already know stuff about me doesn't prevent you from hearing the case. The Supreme Court said you're going to know stuff as being board member. You're going to know things because you live in the community. You're going to know things because people come up to you. The question is, can you be impartial, or have you already made up your mind? And what John's going to do, if you do ever have one of these hearings, he's going to sit down with you and say, what have you done? Who have you talked to? What have people said to you? Help you process, have you already made up your mind? It's as much in your heart as it is in your head. But again, where the board comes down is, has a board member been so involved that the possibility of that board member being impartial is just not in the cards because they've been so involved? The Attorney General has said that if a board member appears to be biased, the rest of the board can and should vote them off the hearing candidates. Now, this is not universally loved by all school board members. When I brought this up in Asheville, I think some of you were there, a board member about got to jump out of her chair and charge the stage. You know, she couldn't believe that I was saying the board had the right to vote off a board member. Well, I didn't say it. First of all, the Attorney General said it. But second of all, I happen to agree with it because our Supreme Court has said if you are biased, it taints the entire decision. And in the Crump case, that Board of Education got sued and had to pay money. So if you know a board member has been too involved and can't be impartial, this attorney does think that it makes good sense to explore potentially removing them from the hearing panel. I've never had it happen yet, because I've had some situations where after the discussion, the board either felt good that the board member could be impartial, or the board member said, you know what, I get it. I don't want my participation to taint this, so I'll get off the board. Last thing I'll say on that, you can see if y'all have questions. Common sense will tell you, a board member that appears to be biased against an employee is legally a bigger problem than a board member who appears to be biased for the employee. Now that drives board members crazy, and I understand that. But if one of you is trying to help me, and the rest of you think that board member is trying to help me, and I'm coming up for dismissal, then are my rights necessarily being as clearly violated by a board member who appears to be sympathetic to me as if a board member was opposed to me? I just think the legal concern is heightened when a board member appears to be against an employee instead of in favor of an employee. But that's a tricky situation. And I've even had board members on both sides of that get off the hearing panel. One board member said, I'll get off because I know everybody thinks I'm in favor of the employee. Another board member said, well, I'll get off because I know everybody thinks, based on what I said 2 years ago, that I'm not the idiot. So, you know, it's as much your heart as it is your head when you sit. They're all case by case. Can't give you a clean cut.
An at-will employee is the same thing as an employee. When you use that, or do you think of it just tenured or non-tenured? Do you think of school employees as in teachers, or does an at-will employee come under that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. They just changed the rules on at-will employees. And what they did with at-will employees was that you can still appeal your termination to the board, but you do not have the right to appeal that termination to Superior Court under the school statute. You can always sue claiming public policy discrimination. Latino bus driver superintendent recommends that they be terminated because they're late to work every single day. That bus driver can appeal that to you, the board, and you'll hear it. But that bus driver doesn't have the right to then take your decision and take it to Superior Court. Now, the bus driver can claim racial discrimination. I mean, that's always a thing. You can go to federal court on a violation of Title VII and say that you've been racially discriminated against. But, excuse me, the decision that the board made, though, is no longer appealable. That just happened with this General Assembly. So you are likely to hear from at-will employees. And what I tell superintendents is, you always need a good reason to fire somebody, because everybody can bring it to the board. So now a teacher can come to you, a principal can come to you, a bus driver can come to you, a cafeteria worker can come to you. Anybody that's terminated has the ability, or recommended for termination, has the ability to come to you.
Okay, what if you're terminating them from like a coaching situation and not their permanent job, not their bread and butter job, but a coaching job?
The conventionalism so far has been that with the additional duties of coaching, is it something that was part of a contract supplement or something that was agreed to? Most systems have decided on letting that employee come to the board, but no further. That, you obviously do not have a contract right necessarily in coaching. That's usually an additional duty.
And the recent changes to 115C 325, the contract change that we'll get more into specifically, I think they're trying to get at that where they say special duties such as assignment to coaching duties or as a choral director, I think it says. I don't know how they picked out choral director, but the loss of those is not a demotion. So I think they're trying to get at that to say those things are not the core duties that these contract rights are going to be about.
Can that person appeal?
Can they appeal under 45C is the open question. And I've kind of said take that on a case by case. Look at what they're claiming or what their complaint is. Also look at what your board policy is. Was it a board decision? You cannot appeal a board decision back to the board. And sometimes boards are asked to approve coaching assignments. Every district's different. Some districts, the superintendent does make the decision, but the board actually approves it. Some districts leave it totally up to the superintendent. Those that leave it totally up to the superintendent a lot of times have allowed the employee to come before the board for a short appeal if they really want to appeal it. But think about that too. In this board has had situations. You give certain things to the superintendent. So if I'm an employee appealing to you, as an attorney, I think that you should apply a higher standard to that appeal. You shouldn't be second guessing Dr. Baldwin's choice just because you think you would have chosen different. You need to be asking the question, did he make an error somewhere in the process? Is there some reason for us to overturn this other than as an individual I would have picked somebody else? Because if your board policy is the superintendent assigns coaching duties, you need to honor that board policy. So you get in some really awkward situations sometimes where the employee appeals something that by board policy you've given to the superintendent, but they still have the right under statute to appeal. And I just think you have to be mindful of that. And I think you have to be careful as a board not to open the door to we're going to second guess the superintendent every time somebody makes an appeal.
Chris, let me make sure I understood what you just said. And you may know this. This board has on our consent agenda, we approve all positions, including coaches.
Okay.
That's brought forward. So the understanding you say, if that's the case, what Gary's talking about, that coach has no right to appeal to the board
It is
because we
final.
have approved it. We approved it in our consent agenda, so we have had, in essence, we've approved it. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes. Now, if that coach is removed, that may be a different situation. You might have to analyze that. But the decision to hire is not appealable to the board if the board is the one approving.
If there's
Correct.
more, sorry, if there's, I'm going back to the removing yourself if you're biased. Is there a certain limit of how many board members need to be on there to be able to hear a case?
No, fascinating question. Could you get all the way down to one? I think you could. Yeah, somebody's got to hear it. Yeah, and I think all us school lawyers, we're all waiting on the case where the entire board is biased. And the question is, well, does the person get off scot-free, or what do you do in that case? But no, there's no minimum.
I know now, Mr. Henry, why you flinched last night when I said something.
Could have been any number of things.
Got ahead of the game.
In our little small communities like this, Chris, I think this is one of the biggest things that comes up. People call and they want to talk to you about it. And you try to explain to them, you can't listen. You understand, I have to sit as the hearing. They just don't understand that. I've been accused, you just don't want to listen to me. And I'm saying, I cannot do this. And people get a little bit out of shape.
And like Chris highlighted, the Crump decision does leave you leeway to know about it. You don't have to hang up immediately when somebody calls like that, but it needs to be, you need to, as soon as you can, say, look, I really need to not know a whole lot about this. It's going to be presented to me as a case.
Now, let me give you my fact. You answer the phone. Mr. Breedlove, I'm going to tell you something that you need to know about that school system. Before I tell you, I want you to promise me that my name will never be mentioned. That you won't bring me into it. Again, we can only give advice. My suggested response to that person is, no, I'm not going to promise you that your name will not be brought into it, and here's why. I took an oath of office and swore to uphold the law and protect the school kids in Macon County. Now, if I don't need to bring your name into it, I won't, but I'm not making any promises. You know, I've got to do my job and do my duty. If you got something to tell me, I'm ready to listen. But I'm not going to promise anything except if it's serious, it'll be looked into and it'll be dealt with. To me, I love that response because if it's serious, in my experience, they'll tell you. They'll say, well, I understand, I appreciate that, and I know you can't, I know you can't keep me out of it. You got a math teacher buying beer for kids on camping trips. Bingo, we needed to know that. The one that says, well, let me think about it and I'll call you back. They were upset with the volleyball coach. And the volleyball coach's decision to pull their child with 5 minutes to go in the game. I mean, it is just something, silly.
What's silly about that?
Yeah. You're right, to them it's not.
Get 'em all.
But I think when you don't ever promise somebody and don't ever let them do that, just tell them, hey, I took an oath of office, I can't, you know that. You know I can't make a promise like that.
You should have talked to me last year before the girl called me about flowers. It did not end well. I tried.
Right, yeah. And the other thing too, what we talked about too, Jim, is always having somewhere to send them to. When you tell them you can't talk to them, if it is something the superintendent is handling, tell them, please call the superintendent. Or I'll call the superintendent, let him know you called. You can expect, that's always great, you can expect the superintendent to call you, because I'm going to call him right now and let him know that you made that call. Or if it's something if they're mad at the superintendent, which happens on occasion, you can forward them on to the board attorney. It helps to
I don't know why that's so funny.
Or send them to Renee. She'll send them out. Exactly. All right.
I need a Renee.
Okay, I think we're good there. All right, let's move into the legislative realm here. Have in past, did you use school counselors as your testing coordinators?
Yes.
You did, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about
Okay.
that. All right, let me hit a couple of quick things, and then I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about the teacher tenure changes to the law and the 25%.
Oh, yeah.
Cheese and all that. But let me hit a couple of quick ones. The first one is the teacher supplements for master's pay. This is straightforward. For a teacher to be paid master's pay, they've got to have that degree and get at least one paycheck in 13-14 with master's pay on it. So if they can get that degree and get graduated and get paid by the end of this school year, they will retain that master's pay. They'll be grandfathered along with everybody else. Teachers who have no hope of graduating this year are out of luck under current law on getting any master's pay whatsoever. It's just that simple. The colleges are trying to move up their graduation dates, but DPI still has to process it so that your finance officer can pay it and your human resources department can pay it. So I think this is going to continue, and you may have identified, do you even know if you've got any teachers that are in this window?
We do, I'm sure we do.
It may be a good idea to go ahead and try to find out who they are, where they are, what their graduation date is, so you can be as
Most
proactive
of
as
the contact
possible.
you
Okay. It might be helpful to know. And that may even be something that it's okay for you to tell the board in closed session who they are and where they are in that process. And trying to help them out and get them there as quickly as we can. So that's the current law. The governor had issued a press release saying that he had found money to pay for that, and then his press secretary issued a release saying, no, he hadn't found money, it was part of the spending plan for the next year. But everything I'm hearing is that if you graduate and you get a paycheck this year, you'll be okay. At least one paycheck. The bigger one, and this is a headache, and schools are just going to have to figure out a way to deal with this. We change the view on some of that separation in the
Can I ask you a question before you go on?
Yeah.
To receive your national board certification, do you have to have a master's degree?
I don't know that.
You don't?
Well,
So you don't BABS to national board certified. So why would anybody spend their time after 13, 14 working on a master's to just go to national board? Because is it still a 12%?
It is. And it surprises me that they left national board pay in there, but
I
took
see
out the
here.
master's degree thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if they just overlooked that or what.
Person who passed his wife is national board certified, so there you go.
Yeah, it will be it.
And this does not affect any kind of other extra pay. If someone's got a doctorate, they'll continue to get the pay. It only affects those issues with the master's degree.
Of course, that's the kind of thing to stay tuned for in the short session, because they might find it and say, oops, you know, we didn't mean to include that, and tone it up for the next year.
Well, what hurt the last superintendent's council meeting was that there's a lot of support to bring advanced degree pay back, both from the General Assembly and from the governor.
Yeah.
And by the governor.
He would take care of himself.
The governor said that they shouldn't have done that. They should never have taken it away, and then there's a lot of support in the General Assembly right now to bring it back.
I think you call it universities.
Oh, yeah.
Hollering and screaming too.
Yeah, because they really hurt their programs. Yeah. School counselors, this one's a big deal though. And the superintendent's going to be working through this with other superintendents all across the state. School counselors cannot be testing coordinators anymore, period. 80% of their day has to be spent.
Starting when?
Correct. This year.
This year.
What are we gonna do?
I'll stop right there. You know what a big deal it is.
I mean, I can't even
Yeah.
imagine. At our school, that's our, I mean, anyway, okay, wow.
And especially in schools like Cartuja and Iowa Valley that don't have lead teachers or assistant principals. I know Cartuja is using the Title I, plan on using it for their Title I teachers to take up that role. I'm not sure what Gary Brown's doing to them.
But now you still got that 20% you can play with.
They can still help with testing, they just can't be the testing coordinator.
Yeah, but now there was some misinformation that went out on the 20%. The General Assembly, look at the bottom of the black part there. 20% must be school counseling program support activities, just like direct services support activities do not include the coordination of standardized testing. They cannot spend 20% of their time as a testing coordinator. That some people got that wrong, and some information went out.
I would have gotten it interpreted wrong.
Yeah, the 20% you can assist, but you still cannot coordinate testing during the 20%. Now, the only workaround, and y'all have to believe this, I don't know anybody that does, would be that you could arguably hire a school counselor to be 80% a school counselor and 20% a testing coordinator, or 30% a testing coordinator, but you'd have to pay them out of local funds for that 30%. You couldn't pay them out of state funds as a school counselor. And most districts are telling me that's just not workable because they just don't have that money. I mean, it's not something that they can
Well,
do.
tell me what the conflict of interest is and why is it that they want to get involved in telling us what we need to do with our employees that we have been doing this with and
Well,
we're successful.
I'll say I agree with the idea that school counselors should not be test coordinators, but tell us who should be.
Okay, so just for my own information, how come they should not be?
They should be involved in counseling, especially in that time of the school year when we do a lot of testing. At the end of the school year.
If I can interrupt, high school counselor, my wife is in a situation where at one time she was trying to coordinate testing and also tried to counsel seniors, get them ready to graduate and do all those other things. Wasn't working. And frankly, it was an infringement for them to have to try to do that. It was just,
Well,
a true
I agree.
high school counselor did not have time to do it.
It was a
But now-
complaint we heard here a lot.
And I would
It's
agree.
beginning to
Our
take
We've
counselor-
over
done
the
that,
job.
but at the same time, what you're talking about, like at Highlands.
Our
it
counselor
makes-
did not do a very good job with our seniors.
Right, in terms of
He
that,
did.
so that was
You
what.
give
we-
up something, and that's why they're fighting again. Now, this came out
Well-
of your counseling lobby.
But at the same time, they
Counsel.
continue to take money from us. So I
Oh,
guess
yeah.
I just have a little issue with that. Chris, can you do anything with that?
With the lobbying issue or the?
Well, just getting us some more money. They told me you're a miracle
Well,
worker.
not only that, but give us more tests.
I'm gonna see if the governor can find any more money.
I knew I liked you.
And the other thing about the testing is that all the conditions about it where, only you can see them, you have to count, and basically what you were doing is you're putting people that had other demands on their duties in charge of something that could cost them their job to do something that wasn't their fault.
Right,
But you have to
right,
depend on the classroom teachers return the test, make sure all accounted for, yada, yada. It was just
Well, that's why I
just
asked the
too much.
question, when y'all could give me all these great answers. But now what's the answer to the problem, the issue with, who do you,
Well, it depends on the
Proceed.
school right now. Schools that have assistant principals, they'll probably be picking up more of those test coordination duties. schools like Cartooja, that Title I teacher's gonna be involved. The principal's gonna be much more involved at Iowa Valley, I'm sure.
Well, I
It's just
can see
gonna
where-
depend on the school.
Okay.
But that says standardized test, that is not part of the state test.
Yeah, that
They do
is,
not include the coordination of standardized tests.
those are standardized
Yes,
tests.
that would be standardized within now.
Yeah.
I see.
That includes the common exams, the EOCs, the EOGs, the ACT.
Well, why don't we just quit giving those tests out?
That's a good question.
That'd be really good, wouldn't it?
Well, I think they are trying to look
About that,
at some way
Chris, did you hear that?
to decrease it.
Well, you know, they said that. They reduced the number of EOCs that we had, and then they brought the common exam, the MSLs, and they changed the common exams, and they increased the number of tests that we get.
We're back up to 10 now.
We're more than that. And we're looking at testing everything. We're looking at testing chorus, art, band, PE, all of the standardized tests.
PE and band?
BFS.
Now, I think the governor's backing away from that a little bit, but it's still on the table.
Okay.
But
It's just, there's no, the key is what you said, Seth. It's all about the money. We don't have the monies to do the things. Yep, people dictate to you, this is what you need to do, but how do you do it when you have limited funds? Yet you have no choice. So it's a quandary that I don't know that there is no such thing as a good answer.
Well, I think
Period.
the state is really starting to lean on school boards and local government to pick up their shortfall. And
Well, I think a good example, and this is something that we're all very familiar with, and that's the issue that we have with copiers right now. Our costs extra charge. Last year, we made 8 million copies. That cost us $217,000. What was that, $67,000 over our original contract. The state of North Carolina gave us $127,000 for instructional supply material. They gave us $62,000 for textbooks, and that's all they gave us for instructional support materials. That added up to $189,000. That didn't even cover the cost of copies. We've not been able to buy a textbook since 2005 at the latest.
so that's a no-brainer that you're going to need more copies.
Right, we're going to need more copies, but the state is not giving us enough money to purchase copies.
Well,
I mean, and you know, we say we have to have more copies, but how are we going to pay for them?
I don't know. Something's going to have to give because you can't not give them copies.
We paid for them last year, and we're going to pay for them again this year. But that money, I think folks have got to understand is that money got to come from somewhere. And when it comes from somewhere, it's going to be taken away from something else. And it's, you know, we're getting to the point where we don't have places to take that money from.
That's true, but we were talking about the other day about how we don't necessarily think our education is failing. When you start not having enough copies to give these students that have no books, you will start to see a decline in our education. I can see it in my own child if she cannot have some of these papers to come home because their teachers tell me, I don't have a book for her. I do not have a book for her.
Now, you're preaching to the wrong person.
Preaching to the choir.
You know, we had $189,000 from the state, and we made $217,000. That's in copies. So imagine what we need for supplementary materials.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second.
Common Core.
Why do we have a contract that says that we only have these amount of copies? Because I would think we would know ahead of time.
Let's not pay too much attention to the contract because, like I say, we went over last year. Angie, how many times in the last 10 years have we went over? Have we ever been?
Only every year.
Yeah.
I was going to say half.
Much, I would think.
So the point is, you know, we've always gone over that copier limit. We just always have had the money to cover it. And now we like you say, or like we've said, we haven't had textbooks. We've got new Common Core. So, and the thing about that is this, the state hasn't given us the money to purchase textbooks since 2005-06.
Well, we should have a North Carolina state representative in here hearing some of this.
Well, now, according to them, this is the most that they've ever given public education.
It's a new form of math.
Yeah,
Paul
it's
Hitchens.
called the new form of math. It's not taking into account the increase in our student population. All they want to do is look at the bottom line figure. Well, last year we had $10. This year we increased it to $12. But guys, what you're not saying is, the student population has increased by 20, 30%. So, yeah, you're not, per student, you're spending less now than you did 10 years ago. Yeah, you know, it's all math, funny math.
Cost of health, insurance and things like that, that don't ever reach the school.
Yep.
But here's what somebody has to tell them, and I don't know who this is. From a local standpoint, you're right about it being passed down to the local. But when that person runs for county commissioner and they present an idea of raising even 1 penny, and what was that, $1 million?
$900,000.
Let's just say 2 is, you're talking about 2 cents raising, let's say $2 million. And that's 1 trip to Burger King. But you won't get elected.
No.
But now, when you go out here and talk to people, to some of our former county leaders and stuff, they will tell you need a tax increase. But when you go public with that, you're dead in the water.
Unless there's any way you could educate everybody enough to realize what is the difference it's gonna make. And when, I'm not preaching to you, but we all know that if we don't get them at the beginning of it, we're gonna spend it at the end, and it's a whole lot better for our society and our county. I just don't know what to do with it. We're gonna have to educate our public more and more to.
And the point I'm making with that is that, you know, we've always gone over the copier contract. I mean, we've always done that. We're gonna do it again this year, but we just don't have the options that we used to have to bring that money in. You know, we're $500,000 less from the state this year than we received last year. We're in a
So
tight
basically,
spot.
teachers and parents are the only place that you steal office material from home and take it to school and work, because, I mean, we literally take paper up there. I mean,
Well,
take paper up there and give them to them, you know?
Well, and you know, that this is a little bit of a sidelight, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about that copier contract. Is paper doesn't help us.
This is how many goes through there.
Yeah, it's the copies, it's the
Your contract is on
The ink,
The ink,
the
that's the
toner,
three
that
copies,
sort of-
it's not your paper.
the paper comes out from instructional supplies, which the state didn't give us enough to cover the copies.
So we buy ink, I don't know what the answer is. I just
I'm
know
gonna
this is gonna
summarize.
have to be addressed. We're not.
Think of it this way, Stephanie. How can you justify a legislature that changes your entire curriculum? They change the whole thing pretty much.
Exactly.
Yet they will not give you money for textbooks.
I know.
Explain that to me.
I've had
How-
teachers.
What is your thinking?
If I could explain that
in
to you,
terms of-
first of all, I have a different job than I do.
Go from there.
But
Well, and going back to the copies, we're gonna cover the copies.
I realize that,
That's
but what are we
gonna
gonna do? We're still, and we're off subject here, but we still have this to address on and on, because our children,
No, that's an absolute fact.
I mean, because we have to, if, like he says, we're changing the core curriculum. I had a teacher say to me, you know, I have to have these copies because I have to find this, I have to go and find this core curriculum that they're teaching me.
Every teacher
And then
does that.
also, she's having to go, she's trying to get depth to our children instead of just giving them a little bit of fluff
Without a textbook.
without a textbook.
Right.
So we've taken the textbooks away from them. Now we're saying, okay, we're going to give them copies this year, but
Now,
Even
copies,
not-
yeah,
but you're saying even by choice, you may not can give me these copies next year to my students. You're not saying this is not what I want
I
to do.
don't know what the state's gonna do. I mean, if they cut us another $500,000, I don't know what we'll do.
Right.
I mean,
So it's just something we're going to have to continue
Well,
addressing.
Welcome to the budget process for next year.
But I think also,
And
our public has
start
to
talking
be,
about it.
we can't be the best kept secret in town with this dilemma. You have to talk to your political leaders who can do things and take a bullet. And tax, the word tax is a bullet. And,
Go ahead.
but you can't run to say, I want to rotate through there and I'm not going to use the word tax. I am telling you, that is what we need in
Yeah.
Macon County. That's
And-
what we need. But now it's you're dead in water.
And can you do that and it make it school specific? I'm just wondering.
You-
We're off subject with you guys. We need to go back to that.
Yeah, we'll get back. We'll have Chris, sorry.
That's fine.
As you can understand, this is a
You
sore,
can-
this is
you
a
can
sore
do that.
topic with this,
But
every board.
Let me just add one thing though too. It's important to remember that, you know, some people are blaming Tim for this. They may be blaming Angie, blaming me for it, but if we had money, there would not be any discussion about this. I mean, it needs to be, the blame needs to be put where it should be, and that is on our funding source, the state.
And I guess I would clarify, I would agree with you that it needs to be, I mean, I don't blame Tim or Angie or you, but I'm gonna call all of you if I don't get it. Because,
Well, and I'm not saying you are,
Yeah.
I'm saying that, you know,
and they do, they wonder why it
Sure.
doesn't come, but that again is my job. Every time I go, I went to see Kendra for 2 seconds because I needed something positive yesterday, and it took me an hour to get out of school. An hour because they wanted to tell me their paper issues. And I respect that, and I understand it, I totally get it. But it's even bad that we're having to have these conversations that we don't have enough copies in our classroom. And even and then what they do, the secretary is like, they sent me these things that said I have to have these. This is a requirement. But then they send me the next.
who makes that requirement? That's the other thing.
I'm
That's
sure
the
North
state.
Carolina State.
Yeah,
I mean, it
exactly.
came from this
Exactly.
office, but I'm sure somebody told you to do it because
It's a state.
you have something better to do than to send us things to do. But I mean, here you go. Do all these things, and by the way, I cannot give you enough copies to do it. Have fun.
Well, and keep in mind now, they can make those copies. There's not a limit on the copies.
I realize that.
Principals are going to be monitoring it. So if you just tell them that, I think they're still under the idea that once we get to that 5,000 or 2,000 threshold, we don't get to make any more copies.
I promise you, they're still under that. I've told them that your dear, sweet superintendent has taken care of that for you, but they're still nervous that it's not quite there.
But if they want to change, how many employees do we have in Macon County Schools?
600.
Well, let's just say
80.
600.
You say 600,
You
right?
look at the status, with the exception of me, everybody's supposed to have at least 10 friends. So 1,000 votes can change this, your local election, and if you did it through North Carolina, it can change your national election, and people will get involved in it. And 6,000 votes can change your local election. If they say, look, we need another penny, we need a penny and a half. If those teachers can get their 10 friends,
I'll campaign for them.
it'll happen.
Well, it's like that graphic we looked at last night,
Right.
comparing teacher salary growth in the last 10 years. If they don't do it now, they never will.
I think, well, we're way off. I'm just.
Yeah. We got to let Chris get back across the mountain, so let's.
Yeah.
Oh, no, this is.
I don't know about you, Chris, but I feel like I've been at Wimbledon last.
Well, and I will make one comment. These are fantastic discussions, and they do absolutely no good if they only happen in this room. And you need to have a joint meeting with your county commissioners and very politely tell them what you need and that you'll support it if they would support it. You need to meet with your local delegation. Your local delegation will tell you they don't hear from anybody who's upset, you know? And so if you want Raleigh to change, you actually need to meet with your local delegation, whether you think they all agree with you or not, and make sure they understand your viewpoint as a school board. I mean, that's invaluable.
And I'm pretty sure they don't agree with me, or otherwise I wouldn't need to meet them.
Yeah, you know, I mean.
To some degree. I mean,
I think
you're
it's
sending me
more
that money.
important. When you don't think a legislator necessarily sees it the way you do, I think it's more important to have a face-to-face meeting.
Absolutely.
And to get to know each other.
And I think what you hit on a really good concrete topic to give them is we don't have materials to put in front of students, and how is anybody going to get educated in those circumstances? So that's where we need help.
But see, we're lacking a grassroots effort here. If it's happening in Macon County, people, it's happening in the other 100 counties.
Well, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Where is the revolution?
Can you use another descriptor besides grassroots?
Yeah, we've been through that. It's stuck in my mind. But anyway,
We should be getting excited about, and I do. If you start affecting my child's education, and everybody else should get as excited as I am, whether they're on the school board, whether it's your grandchild, or whether it didn't even, if your children are out of school, you should still get excited because your county and your town is going to be affected if we do not educate our children well enough.
I will tell you, PTOs are not being utilized the way they should. That's a place to start.
It is a wet place to start.
Because if they
They're
would get organized and if they would do petitions and send emails to legislators, I think it would start making a difference.
And I'm going to be quiet now.
That's personal. Teacher tenure, okay?
Real quickly, we'll kind of do this with a broad brush stroke because a lot is still up in the air. And to that end, I'm going to ask you to notice that box that's dominating about a third of the page in the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to ask you to ignore that for right now. We'll circle back to that. If you squint at it just, well, if you squint at it just right, it turns into a
That's why
question.
you came this morning.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that. The rest of the timeline, and I think that Dr. Baldwin, he did a good job of presenting this to the board when this first passed, and so I think this should be somewhat familiar to you, but the basic idea that you need to know is, number one, no more tenure to be granted if you don't have the ability to grant it any further. And then any teacher hired from here on until 2018 can only get a one-year contract. That has some really strange results, really harsh results, in that if you had a teacher who was a 30-year veteran in the Jackson County schools and been teacher of the year 5 times, and she decided to move over here next year, you can give her a one-year contract, and that's it. You just don't have anything else. We're also going to cruise along in a strange situation until 2018, whereby we have some teachers that are on a 4-year contract. Anybody new who came in is on a 1-year contract, and that'll have to be up for a renewal decision every year until we get to 2018, at which time you can start to offer contracts of either 1, 2, or 4 years. It'll be up to your superintendent's recommendation to the board, subject to your ability to change it, to any teacher who has been in the system for at least 3 years. Anybody who's not been in this system for at least 3 years can only get that 1-year probationary contract. What all of that sounds like to me more than anything is that non-renewal decisions are going to, explode in terms of the number that a board is going to have to face every year. I don't even know how many non-renewal decisions have we had in the past several years. It almost always has resulted in, those were employees who had 1 or 2 years and were trying to see, well, can I be a teacher? And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And now you're going to have to make those same kind of decisions about renewals for teachers who have been here for 25 years. That's a very different situation than we've been in at all before. In terms of what the employment process is going to look like for teachers during their contract, it's not going to look much or maybe any different from the school board's perspective. They get essentially the same laundry list of reasons that are the only ones for which a teacher under the contract can be dismissed. It's the same list as we now have for tenured teachers. And in fact, those same, as Chris will tell you, we're going to have to figure out, anytime there's a decision, the first question is going to be, we're talking about a tenured person or a contract person, and are they 1 or 4 years? And if so, that'll determine which set of laws we're going to apply. Because the tenured teachers keep it until 2018, and all of the old law still applies to them. By the time it gets to the board and your decision, it's going to look very similar. It'll be, here's what they did, and here's the superintendent's proof of that. You'll have to decide whether, and they'll have a chance to rebut. It's the same miniature trial that it's always been. You'll have an opportunity to make findings of fact and decide whether that was justified or not. Any thoughts, Chris?
No, I think that until, John's about to talk about the 25%. So the question is always, well, what are we going to have between now and 2018? You're going to have 1 year contract employees, year to year. You're going to have the 25%, the chosen, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then you're going to have the ones that had tenure. They can just keep it. If you don't take the 25%, if you're not part of that group or you don't take the 4-year contract, if you have tenure right now, you just keep it until 2018. So that's why there are 3 classes of employees until we get to 2018. And I do think it's a really weird situation where a teacher who's tenured and is fabulous wants to come to you next year and can only get a 1-year contract. That's not the kind of job security that people are willing to pick up and do and reorder their lives smart. And I think there's going to be some stagnation among school districts. I think some employees are going to hunker down and stay where they are, given their situation. If I've got a 3-year contract right now, or if I've got, that tenure, I'm not going to. So I think a lot of tenured employees are probably going to.
Let me ask you this, let's say that we offer, we determine that the teacher is in our top 25%. What happens if they change districts?
Gone.
Is
They
that
lose
right?
them.
You can go get a 1-year contract.
And go get a 1-year contract. You want to hit the 25%?
Yeah, before we do that, one other thing about non-renewals, and Chris, I really wanted to get your opinion on this. I don't think there's going to be an explosion of decisions to non-renew teachers, because we don't have many that we go through in this district. But the decision to renew is going to come up a lot more often. Supposedly, they struck out of Section 45C the ability to have an appeal of that decision for whether or not it was an arbitrary, capricious decision. Supposedly now there's no ability to appeal that to Superior Court. But
Is that where it says the board may grant a hearing?
May grant a hearing, and then they just struck through the part that said it could be appealed forward. They struck through number 3 in that list of 4 things. I'm very skeptical of that. I don't think that.
I think what they tried to do, right now, take community colleges. Most community colleges give a 1-year contract. You have no expectation of continued employment beyond that 1 year. The community college still makes a renewal decision, but you have no expectation that you're going to be employed from union. I think that's what the General Assembly is trying to do with teachers. Now, if you talk to legislators, this is what they'll tell you. They'll tell you is, we're trying to make it easier for you school boards to get rid of. They said especially between now and 2018, you should be able to empty out the hen house of all the bad chickens. You got all the tools you need now. They can't appeal it to Superior Court.
Georgia and South Carolina are doing that for us.
And South Carolina is doing that for us. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that folks are going south of the border making more money and getting a contract. Big time. So that's what they'll tell you is they're trying to make it easier for you to get rid of bad employees.
But I find it very hard to believe that there's a standard articulated that is still the arbitrary and capricious standard by which their decision to non-renew has to meet that standard. But there's no right to appeal that. Who holds them to that?
Yeah, and I think what's going to have to flesh out is that may not be judicial review now, but you still may be able to sue for wrongful termination.
So they're going to be able to go somewhere with those claims. So.
Scenario, John, is that come 18, we have a teacher. Let me make sure I got this right. I lost my train of thought of math. After that point, if you're only on a 1-year contract, you come for renewal every year, and in essence, that employee can be terminated for really just about any reason that you would like to trot out, that you don't have to renew that contract.
As long as it's not arbitrary, capricious, personal, political, or discriminatory.
Now, and is the burden proof on the employee to prove that the decision was?
Yes. They will have to sue and make their case, but I don't think just because the legislature struck through the number 3 in that one particular statute, I don't see that as, employees that are facing that situation are not just going to throw up their hands and say, oh, well, I guess I'll go get a job at Jiffy Lube. They're going to, I think some of them are going to try to stick in, and it's a little bit like John DeVille described it as lawsuit flypaper. There's quite a bit of it in this stuff. We'll move on to the 25% question. I think you all also know, as part of this budget bill, the superintendent is directed between September 1st, 2013 and June 30th, 2014 of evaluating the performance evaluations of all the teachers in the district and deriving from that a list of 25% to be offered this $500 per year increase in their salary for a 4-year contract that would require them to relinquish their their tenure right at that point.
And I expect that list to be ready by at least June 29th.
Yeah.
I think I may have emailed you this thought. I think this is my opinion. See, how many people did we try to, 57 or what?
Yeah, it's around 60.
Around 60. Now, this is not going to be a,
60 is what?
That's 25% of our career teachers. Now, that's not factoring in, they've not decided what exactly a teacher is right now.
That's the biggest problem. The definition of teacher includes media coordinators, counselors, social workers. Well, somebody pointed that out to the General Assembly and they went, what? We thought it was all hell and crumbs. We thought it was just teachers standing up in front of kids.
And Mr. Sheila, I think I know where you're going with this, and I see the issue I have is that it's not going to be $500 this year, $500 next year, $500 next year. It's going to be $500 this year, $1,000 the next year, $1,500 the next, and then $2,000, and then they keep it. They keep getting that $2,000 every year.
Now, that one is that's what the legislative staff
I didn't know
says.
that.
No, I didn't. I found that out a week and a half ago.
In the session.
I've known that for a little while, and any teacher that has tenure will take that deal.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody,
I would-
if you think about it, what's
99.9%,
going
I
on.
would say.
To me, it looks like a bribe to get people to give up their tenure voluntarily. But I've talked to some teachers who are good, some of our better teachers said, would you take this deal? And they look at me like I'm an idiot and say, of course we're going to take the deal. Why not?
They'll have to now. I mean,
Now,
the impact that's going to have on their retirement and just their salary today.
And here's the part that makes it, I'm sorry, John, makes it worse, is now, when this sinks in, Chris's job becomes almost impossible because you talk about bad feelings of career teachers when you start separating that 25% and you're telling a excellent teacher, well, guess what? You're not going to be able, your retirement's going to affect because you're not going to get this money.
You're number 61.
Your number 61 will cut.
Imagine going down the hall, Franklin High School or any other school in this district, and you've got career teachers in there, and this one gets it, this one doesn't. This one gets it, those two don't.
And I think this is a very senile, maybe not, view of that. I think sometimes the ploy is to dismantle public education physically and mentally.
It's called divide and conquer, is the words that they use at the superintendent's council.
It's a rhyme and reason behind it, and we're sitting here trying to make rhyme and reason out of it. No, it's trying to create a dysfunctional.
I was asking Chris about a feature of this, and he said to me, I don't try to explain the reasoning behind this because it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So I'm just not going to try.
You can't. Well, unless the reason is, it's an attack. That's what Gary's saying there, and it's the way you dismantle.
And that's we're going to have the same problems when we start justifying how we came up with that top 25%.
How are you going to do that?
There's no way.
Well,
I mean, gosh, that just seems kind of somewhat cruel.
See, Chris used the word, what was the term about capricious? What'd you?
arbitrary and capricious.
So when you get down to number 60 and number 61, you're opening yourself up to a lawsuit about arbitrary and capricious. So what criteria did you use to separate me from number 60? You're denying me the chance to improve my retirement and get this money. So you didn't show me why. And you're talking lawsuit fly paper, is what John said there. You
Well, I have to say, if
It's
I was
over
that
and over.
number, I couldn't help but wonder.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to get together at risk with all the superintendents, and we're going to spend at least a day brainstorming on how to do this. What are the criteria? What are the factors? I think it's real important that you folks and John get together and decide how you're going to do it ahead of time, and that the board approve the process so that individual employees don't come back and say, well, what about me? You can say, we did the best we could with the process. And let me tell you one idea. I'm not advocating this right now. But one idea I've had is to come up with very good criteria. And if you have more than 60 employees that meet those criteria, you'd have a lottery within the criteria. And you'd say to teachers, we apologize. We're having a lottery because we can't say that number 60 is better
You know,
than
as
number
bad as
61.
that sounds,
It works.
there's nothing any better.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's kind of sad, isn't it?
Yeah,
Sitting
if
here
you're
thinking,
upset, we're upset at this, and I think, this is another reason you need to have a very respectful joint meeting with your local delegation and just say, guys, stuff like this kills us.
It is somewhat shocking to me, really. I mean,
You
But
think,
even
you
if
think
you-
the copier issue's bad?
I think this puts you in a situation that you shouldn't have to be. But even as a superintendent, you should not be having to go put yourself out there in any form that makes you feel like there is any kind of favoritism, because you're trying to be across the board with everybody anyway. And I just think that puts our superintendents in a light that shouldn't have to be exposed to them.
But given where we are with this, the best thing that we can do is come up with a plan that the board is going to get on board with ahead of time. The selection will get made in the criteria that are there, and you're going to ignore the part of this that says that you can
Modify.
take the list and modify it however you want to, because that is just begging for trouble.
Okay.
So that's the key part as far as us, our
And I would have to agree with
participation.
you.
Because they also threw us under the bus,
By
is the way I
saying
put
you
it,
can modify
by
it.
saying, Stephanie, what they're
You
saying
have
is,
people
well,
like
guess
that.
what? Yeah, the superintendents have to do this,
But we buy
but
lottery
guess what?
tickets.
We're gonna let the Board of Education
Oh, yeah.
modify and
This is
come
not-
in and second guess it.
There's not a
Oh,
thing out
my
there that you could
heavens.
say that I wouldn't.
I think
do.
that would just, I couldn't do it. I just
Well,
couldn't do it.
but trust me, there'll be boards that will do that. It'll be across, as Chris is telling some horror stories about what's going on in the Boards of Education, we all get along and I think we have a wonderful relationship. It's not that way in other counties. Now, you talk about a firestorm, can you imagine? Superintendent bringing in and Stephanie McCall or Jim Breedlove having one of my relatives is off that list?
Well,
And people that I've got things, we're gonna say, guess what, Mr. Superintendent, we're not taking this, we're gonna put this person, this and this in there. That's who we're gonna be giving.
Or your wife is number 61.
And you can do
let's,
that.
let's look at this example, for instance. We talked about.
Yeah, if any of this is wrong, you two interrupt us when we're
No,
talking
and
about
one
it.
thing I'll throw out there, y'all think about it for later, but if you want to put all this down in writing, Leanne Winter is a wonderful person to help you put it in writing so that you can send it to your entire delegation. And say, with all due respect, please consider these things that you just did to us and the effect they have on public
Yeah, I agree with
education.
that. We had a discussion, John and Mr. Moore and I, the other day about how we go about doing this. We looked at the better evaluations, choose the top 25% from that. Well, that's going to depend on your principal.
That's exactly what I was
Or
thinking.
at Franklin High School, Mr. Woody, Ms. Cabe, and I, we evaluated teachers differently.
Sure.
So, let's say that you have a spouse, one of the board members has a spouse that works at one of the schools. And because of the way that they were evaluated, they were happy with their evaluations until we now compared them to the evaluations of other principals.
You don't give distinguished. Lonnie will give a distinguished
Right.
education. His employee's gonna have an advantage over your employee.
Exactly.
The principal who used to be at the school never gave anything higher than proficient, and we're using evaluations over a 2-year period. Those employees are now disadvantaged. There's no way not to be arbitrary and capricious.
No.
And that's why I'm saying a lottery of those who fit criteria, and sure, could they sue? And my response to that would be, yes, it is arbitrary and capricious, and so is the law, and we're bringing in the state of North Carolina as another defendant in the lawsuit. Because the law is arbitrary and capricious. But, I think.
That's what we have on our side.
Dr. Baldwin, if you want to tell them what we've named that plan that you.
That's going to be called the Dan K. Moore plan.
But I think it is crucial that in public board meetings, you continue to reiterate that this is a General Assembly requirement. And you're trying to figure out the best way to deal with it. It is unfair. And it is put upon us by the General Assembly. And on behalf of the General Assembly, we apologize to those teachers who want this 4-year contract with this pay increase that will not get it. You deserve it. All of you deserve it. And if you don't like it, educators, parents, you need to let the local delegation know. This is being handed to us and mandated from Raleigh.
I think too, the whole idea of letting them know that we don't like it, it will help in the whole process too, because they know that we did not agree with it to start with, if we do something with them.
Because
as a
at the end of the
board.
day, it says the superintendent must.
Let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that's adding workload to you that just doesn't.
I mean, there's no doubt, it's the law.
Yeah,
And that's another issue, these are not policies anymore. These are not educational policies that we can tweak and things like that. This is law.
But now, go back over that again. How did I miss about 500 next year, it's 1,000 next year, it's 1,500 next year?
What the session law says is that the teachers at 25%, they're offered a 4-year contract with a $500 raise each year of the 4 years. And apparently the fiscal staff at the General Assembly did calculate that as $500 cumulatively adding up. So $500 this year, you get another raise of $500 the second year. So if you make $40,000 and you take a 4-year contract with this $500 raise, the next year you're making $40,500. The year after that, you're making $41,000, and so on through
And
the
if that
4
wasn't
years.
bad enough, at the end of the 4 years, you keep that $2,000 raise.
And,
For retirement.
you know, looking at this, that's exactly what it says, and a $500 annual pay raise,
Annual pay
Right.
raise. Yeah.
So you end up compounding. Yeah. You start at,
But now-
And I'll
We
tell you,
can't
if-
afford a
Correct.
toner.
While we're
for
talking
our
about this,
coffee.
why don't y'all look at what John's got for you, look under what's called section 9.6, teacher's contract, that's on the, I wanted to call it, if I'm reading this right. What you have to understand, there's even question about the wording. What they're talking about is, does wording mean a compounding of $500, which could result, if I think I'm right, of a total of not just $2,000.
Yeah.
That's
but
what
it
we're
could
talking
total $5,000.
over the 4
Yeah.
years.
Over the
Yeah.
4 years.
And that is what the legislative staff is saying. So in other words, take a real simple example. I make $30,000 a year, okay? At the end of 4 years, I'm gonna be making $32,000, right? So that's where the $2,000 pay raise comes. But in year 1, I made $500 more than I made at the beginning. Year 2, I make 1,000 more than I made at the beginning. Year 3 is 1,500, and year 4 is 2,000. So over the 4 years, I've got $5,000 more dollars in my pocket than I would have had.
And it stays at that figure, am I right?
And it
Once you
stays
get to
at-
5 grand,
and it
that's the way it
stays
does.
at 32.
So you've gone from 30, not just to 32, you're talking about 30 up to 35.
No, 32.
Is that right?
No, you're 32.
What about the compound of the 5,000?
No, I'm saying the compound is just the net effect in your pocket
Okay.
from where you would have otherwise been.
No, okay. I want to clear that, make sure I understood what we were.
And while
Yes.
we're talking about.
500, 1,500 is 2,000, and you get 1,500 next. No, it says 1,500, then you get 1,000, that's 2,500.
Got a slide that shows that.
Then you get 1,500.
Yeah, 5,000 total.
Yeah, that's the 30,000 is the example they gave you. You started with 30,000 and you accept that 4-year contract. Your base salary goes up $500 the next year, $1,000 a year after that, $1,500 a year after that, and $2,000 a year after that. If you add all those, the increase together, it's $5,000 more, like Chris said, more in your pocket.
The crazy thing is, it's true, they're just taking it every 4 years. I mean, let's say that you work for me and I give you a $500 raise. Well, each year, that's $500 more than you had when you started. Well, this law simply says that every year, you're gonna get another $500 raise. So it's moving up from the baseline, Gary, is what you're doing. Your baseline is 30,000. Year 1, you're gonna go up 500 from the baseline. Year 2, you get another $500, so you get to go up 1,000 from the baseline. So they're just taking a 4-year snapshot and saying a $500 per year raise is worth $5,000 to you every 4 years. That's all they're saying.
But I'll tell you, while we're talking about those numbers, per teacher who accepts that contract, think about what that accumulates to over the state of North Carolina. It's a lot of money. And they appropriate, what, $500 for 21% of classroom teachers. That's another problem, is they don't know which teachers they're talking about exactly. But there is no reason I could not with any assurance sit here and tell you that the next time they pass a budget, it'll have all of the funds in there to do that. And meanwhile, you, the local district, have gotten into a contract between you
And
and that
they say we're going to do
individual.
that, so who pays the money?
It's gonna have to be so heavily redlined that.
Well, the other part I didn't
Depending on funds.
put in here is if you, because hopefully we might be able to see it fixed, but if you're locally paid, you're gonna have to pay it.
So
Nowhere in this does it say that the 500 comes from state funds. And the way DPI is interpreting this is if I'm a locally paid teacher, for something like a grant, if I'm federally paid, out of a federal grant, it's gonna have to come out of the federal grant. The state is not gonna allow you to use state funds. And the hard part about that is, okay, you can say, all right, well then let's move that teacher to state. Well, who are you moving to the grant, or who are you moving to local? Well, if they're higher paid already, it may not do you any good. So it's entirely possible that school districts are gonna lose money. And because of this law, it may not be a whole lot of money, but they will lose money this law because they will have local.
Criteria number one, you have to be state paid.
Chris, you just ruined my afternoon.
When you have
That's
roughly
really
$0 in your bank account, you can't afford to lose a whole lot, so.
Yeah.
I would never have thought of that angle, that if you're local.
But now we don't have our local people on our, I mean, we have the youngest people on our local money.
We'll try.
And if we go to the top,
Well, remember, this is 3+ years, so it's entirely
This is it.
possible you've got some teachers that have been living 40 years in a local fail.
no, we wouldn't have.
Not usually, okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah, we try to do the young, or the.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully, but the one I think is hard is the grant funding. I mean, if you're paying a teacher out of grant or something like that, you can't use state funds.
But now, do you have to give them, if they're out of grant funding, can you stay within that money at the grant? Or is this,
You have to read the grant. Hopefully, if there's money in the grant, hopefully you could use the grant to pay the $500. But you have to read the grant and see what the restrictions are in the grant.
And I still can't log into Power School.
What, say that again? You can't log into
You can't log into
Power.
Power School.
I can't see the evaluations. I can't deal with evaluations right now.
Why?
I can't, there's a glitch with the program, we can't get logged in.
within North Carolina?
I guess, I think Miss Cade can at the high school, but I have to log in to be able to, allow other administrators to log in, I guess, give them permission, and I still haven't been able to log in, been trying since school started.
Now, this morning, does your principals, does the principals, or do the principals understand about the $5,000? I found that part upsetting.
Yeah, because I'm hearing a lot of districts say that they may just try to do it school by school.
Well, and as they talk about that, I
25%
think,
of this school.
yeah, Chris has given me a list of bulleted things to remind them of, and that is, don't promise them that it's gonna work out one way or another. Here's what we know. And it's the first part of what we covered, not any of this 25% stuff.
Now, and for what it's worth, Dr. Bowman, my advice is get this message out as fast as you can to all your teachers. Say, look, we have no clue of how this is gonna work. I don't know, the board doesn't know, our lawyers don't know, the state doesn't know, the School Boards Association doesn't know. Let's all focus on what we can control, which is educating our kids. We will work through this as a family, we always have, but please, don't focus on this 25% right now.
Say the
you know?
board don't know, so don't call them.
Yeah, right. I'm telling principals, they should take their teachers seriously. When they come up and say, what are we gonna do about the 25%? Say, I got no clue, go back to your classroom. I got no clue.
What 25%?
Yeah, what 25%? Yeah, that'll come at the end of the year, and the board's gonna wrestle with that, and I have no clue, you don't need to use that.
Well, and we've not discussed it very much to this point because it keeps changing. Every time I speak to someone, I learn something different. I mean, I just found out about the compounding $500 at the superintendent's conference, what was that, a week and a half ago?
Yeah, and the other thing that keeps changing back and forth is, does this year count? Can this be, if you cross into more than 3 years
This
this
is the
year,
third year.
can this be that greater than 3 years? And the DPI barnstormed the state, half the state, and said yes. School Boards Association says no. General Assembly staff says no. And DPI may be coming over to their viewpoint. So it looks like you had to have had more than 3 years as of September 1st. So if you started your 4th year, you're in the pool. But if you started your 3rd year this year, you're not.
And that's what we were figuring was.
Chris, has there been any larger,
And it's not just tenure, real quick too, and I think y'all got this, it's 3+ years, that's the test. So if you brought somebody in from another county and made them tenured within the last 2 years, they don't count, because they hadn't been with you for more than 3 years.
And we didn't do that.
So you may not have anybody like
There shouldn't be very many of those, though.
that. Sorry.
Chris, has there been, I know another issue and related to what year is the cutoff for where this evaluation for the 25% starts?
Right.
Is that, you know, Dr. Baldwin was telling me, principals are telling him there's a flood of teachers running up and saying, you gotta evaluate me, you gotta, hurry up.
Well, the NCAE, I heard from an NCAE rep that, I believe I heard from an NCAE rep that the NCAE was, is it the superintendent's council meeting, that their NCAE rep told them that they're going to encourage all teachers to go to the principal and ask for or request
Performance cycle.
full evaluation.
Yeah, full evaluation
Yep.
cycle, on the full summary, because they have a better shot at getting a higher rating than if you do that one evaluation
And-
that you've traditionally done for your tenure.
And we can log into the evaluation system now.
Now, all it says, you'll look at evaluations and performance in making the decision. So arguably, if everybody who's eligible was with you, has been with you, you could use last year's evaluation, and you can decide now. The law says between September 1 and June 30, you'll make this decision. I'm not advocating you go ahead and make this decision, but some school districts may decide to make this call before they even do year-end evaluation. And say, hey, sorry again, but that's fair because everybody evaluated not knowing that this was a possibility. And that's as fair as everybody knowing.
Or just announce your cutoff and say, not anything after.
Oh, I guarantee there'll be a lot of distinguished teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might have one good year out of it anyway.
I think you put it on compound, my mind had jumped out to where, oh my God, I think it's 5,000. Well, reading that like, the banker in me is going to keep my head. Anyway.
Yeah, be careful with that compound
Yes.
word. Right?
Yeah.
Compound word sends
Yes.
people to federal
Yeah.
prison.
Still bad now.
All right, before we get to the school improvement team, I know y'all are probably tired of talking about it, but the handgun law.
So did they change something with that?
No. Not since
First
you
time I
last. Anything on that? While we're all here, and feel like, I'll tell you, everybody's in the same boat, and right now, unless I'm open to suggestions, but right now I'm advising folks, don't ask. I mean, it's the law. If it comes out of the car, you're a criminal. The minute you take it out of that locked vehicle, you're a criminal. So don't ask. Don't require employees to tell you. Don't require members of the public to tell you. Keep your signs up. Have your signs be factual, and your administration will be looking into that. We don't need to decide that today, but have your signs be factual. And, y'all don't need to be rushing out and changing your signs. Let other people change their signs first and see how it goes before y'all change your signs.
Oh, no, we're all about being the first.
Taking your turn.
Yeah, I've heard enough.
But, and even students, the hardest one is, some districts saying, well, shouldn't we know if a student has a gun in their car? And I just don't, I don't know what you do with that. I don't know if it would be challenged. And again, it's lawful. And the General Assembly said, and they rarely say this, there shall be no other laws or no other ordinances or no other acts affecting concealed carry permits other than what we, the General Assembly, say there shall be. And that's a pretty, John may remember the legal term for a clause like that, or a statute like that, a controlling statute. Sure. That's what we call it. Those aren't usual.
Preemption.
Preemption, yeah. They usually don't do that with the General Assembly.
I think we've pretty much gone over this over and over, Chris. I think we know where we're at. I think the only thing there is, Chris knows, is just the wording on signage that they're going to be working on, and they'll come back after he's had a chance to talk with you and John, and we'll make a decision at that point based on, are we going to change some signage or what?
One of the things I wanted to tell the board, and after Chris and I talked about it, I think it's a better idea to work this in rather than a policy. Because like Chris says, oftentimes policies just write it down and put it in a book and forget about it. You've done it, it's done away with. It needs the fact of the fact that we expect our teachers to maintain the safety of their students in the face of a perceived threat needs to be a yearly, just a training, just maybe even part of an emergency response. School safety plans type treatment, so that it's year by year.
I'm gonna steal that. That is a fabulous idea, is make the training of school staff on the concealed gun carry law part of your school safety plan. That each year, staff will be reminded that this law is not intended for employees to run out to their cars and grab a gun in the case of some emergency. They're to stay with their students and maintain the safety. That this is not, because frankly, I don't care if some legislators have said this is about school safety. It's not. It's a crime to take it out of the car. And again, most free thinkers are saying the time it would take somebody to run out to their vehicle and get a handgun and come back into school, they're a prime target at that point for law enforcement. Somebody running into school with a handgun, and it will not take law enforcement long to respond to these things. So to introduce somebody who's been out in the parking lot, suddenly in the building with a weapon, puts that person in grave risk. And if the General Assembly had been serious about this being school safety, they would have said, in the case of an emergency, the person can retrieve the gun from the car to protect the safety of others. But they didn't go there. It's still a crime to take it out of the car. So I agree with John. That's a great idea, is to make the training about what this law allows and doesn't allow part of the school safety plan. I think that's a better place to put it than board policy.
I think even last time we talked about blowing it up a little bit, making sure that it's at your front door, making sure teachers have it in their handbooks or have it in your room. It needs to be out there where people generate their own ideas of what the law says.
Right, and that's why with the signs, they're going to continue to say no weapons, no guns, maybe except as permitted by the statute. We're going to work through that, but you're exactly right. They are still gun-free campuses.
Right.
I mean, just because you got a lock in your trunk does not change the fact that we have weapon-free, gun-free campuses. And we're going to continue to have signs that say that until somebody shows up.
What exactly would the penalty be if, for any reason, a gun came out of a locked container in a locked vehicle?
At that point, I think it's a misdemeanor.
I think it is.
I think just the possession.
Whatever form.
Well,
not to do
you
that.
broke the law too.
You broke the law, right?
Yeah, but that's what insubordination is one of the reasons, X reasons they give you for terminating somebody.
Well, and I think that's where that's at least this board, I know, generated the intent to form a policy, partly for me telling them, for your personnel, if they've been instructed this way and then they disregard it to do it anyway, it ought to have consequences in terms of.
I like it as part of that school safety plan. That's where you would give the direction to employers too, and say that handguns can be, concealed permit holders can comply with this law, but not comply with the law could subject you to disciplinary action, including termination. Sure.
That's something that the board should do in open session to give support to the superintendent. Issue a directive so that they hear us say that or not, Chris.
Yeah, at this point, I wouldn't, because I think at this point, and I do mean this sincerely, I think there's been enough discussion publicly in Macon County about this. It is straightforward in my book. It is a criminal statute, and leave it up to your superintendent and the principals to get the message to school staff. We don't violate the criminal law. And we're not going to,
I think that's the way I would like to approach is just to go ahead and direct the principals to begin their school safety exercises and explain the concealed carry law on school campuses, and to emphasize that once those guns, if they are ever brought out of that locked container, that locked vehicle, then they are in violation, whoever did it is in violation of state law, and subject to penalty by law and
action by the Board of Education. Yeah. Yeah, in violation of state law.
And I think the public sometimes interprets the law the wrong way, and I think if they come to your school and got one strapped down here, then you can say, and they come to your door, since it's a new thing, and they read that, so I don't think, I feel I have to put this back in my vehicle.
Yeah. Now, generally concealed permit carry holders are the most knowledgeable gun owners. And that's the other reason I'm not concerned from that standpoint.
Say that again?
The concealed permit holders are the most knowledgeable people in our community about gun rights and the laws. What I'm concerned about, frankly, is people not knowing about this law and thinking they can now bring their hunting rifle as long as they leave it in the car. Or they can bring a switchblade knife as long as they leave it in the car.
Well, and it's
We
somewhat.
still cannot have weapons on school grounds. And that's why I think we're totally within our rights, and every school district's going to do this, to continue to have signs, things like Gary's talking about, that say no weapons, except maybe as permitted by, and cite that. The concealed permit holder's going to know that. They're going to know what except pursuant to 14-292.2 or whatever means. They're
And
gonna
it's
know
somewhat
that.
confusing because state to state's different, right? I mean, like Florida is a weapon, concealed weapon. It's not concealed gun. And some of them are concealed guns, and North Carolina is
It's
handgun.
handguns, right.
So it does every.
Short barrel, long barrel.
Yeah, I knew you were. I did not know that was coming.
That's very good advice, and we'll just do it, and it will take care of itself, and we
There's
can
some
move
handguns in
on, get off the
Kansas,
subject.
right?
Probably the best thing we could do.
Yeah, let's don't bring it up
Good deal.
All right.
I agree.
Couple other things real quick, and then we'll just see if there's anything else y'all want to cover. Is this thing with school improvement teams, and this is dead with what we just talked about and the idea that John had that I think is so good. This new law requires that your school improvement team now be a public meeting, okay? So that's number one. We just sent out, and Dr. Baldwin, I think you should have gotten a copy, an email where we kind of give some advice on how to run those meetings, sample minutes that they can take and all that, an email that we sent out. Basically, what we're suggesting to your school principals, because this is a change for them, is that what they have to do by law is they have to post the names of their school improvement team, when they were elected, and what their position of the school improvement team is. And that can be teacher, assistant principal, what have you. They have to notice their meetings on the school website. They also have to notice their meetings according to the open meetings law. With all due respect to Renee, don't throw anything at me. What we've been advising is that the board secretary already knows how to send out notices for public meetings. So some systems are saying if principals will simply send the information to the board secretary within enough time, by a deadline, the board secretary will then send out a meeting notice just like she would for a special call meeting of this morning. And then you kind of centralize it. So the principals can just notify the central office, hey, here's our schedule, a notice can go out, and you're done. And as long as you get those notices out 48 hours before the meeting, you're fine. We're also advising principals, all right, you got a public meeting now, so pick a chairman. You need to have a chairman of that school improvement team because you can have issues come up. You can have people wanting to speak. You may have people that want to be part of the team from the outside, and you kind of need a chairman who can kind of guide that. They do not have to take public comment.
We've had a lot of issues with people wanting to be on school improvement teams.
What I hear is it's an act of Congress to get anybody to show up, is what I hear. But, you know, you need somebody who, in case it happens. And what I tell folks too is, especially on the public comment thing, no, you don't have to have public comment. But take Dr. Wallen's point. It's hard to get people to come to these meetings to begin with. If I've taken the time to come to a school improvement team meeting because I feel like there's something the school should be doing to improve education, is that team going to tell me no, that I can't have 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes to speak to the team? I think you need to be really open as a school improvement team. I think if a parent shows up and wants to discuss something, welcome them. Put them on, give them a few minutes on the agenda and hear from them. Don't get caught up in the fact that you don't have to have public comment. This isn't a school board meeting. If somebody is taking their time to come to a school improvement team meeting, now, here's what I care about that. This team is supposed to go into closed session and come up with a school safety plan. They then submit that school safety plan to the superintendent, who submits it to you folks and John in closed session. You are to review the safety component of each plan of each school and make findings in closed session. Again, Stephanie, why did they pass that law? I have no idea. But obviously they wanted the board to micromanage the school safety component, and maybe that was the way they could say we improve school safety is we're making boards actually review that component. But you'll do that in closed session, and you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do that this year.
But now, if we have a unified school emergency plan, it's only unified up to a certain point, then your school then has different changes. So are we looking at what is everybody has, or are we looking to have to look beyond?
Yeah. Which one?
The only thing that law requires you to review is each school's improvement plan as it comes in, review it in closed session and make findings about it. And that means things like, well, did they consider the fact that this parking lot's right next to the, you know, they're gonna have all the kids meet there and that's right by a highway, you know, that sort of thing. Am I making sense to you? I think you're gonna review in fine detail what each school said they're gonna do for their safety plan.
Because at one time, we had 12 unified things. Every school worked with that 12. And because of the school's layout, things went different after the 12. I didn't know if we're just looking for the,
I think you'll do both by necessity. I think the first time you get one, you'll say, okay, are we still happy with our district-wide component? If we are, now let's look at school A. Then when school B comes to you, you can say, well, we've already looked at the unified portion, and we're still happy with it. Let's look at their changes. So, yeah, I think by necessity, you will kick the tires on your system-wide plan at least once. But once you've done that, then I think you'll be looking at the nuances of each school. And, you know, the team's really not going to change the district-wide components unless they make recommendations to you guys and say, hey, you may want to think about this. They're going to be focusing on the things that are unique to their school. You know, and there may be exceptions. I mean, you may have a school come to you. This is why this is a good exercise. You may have a school come to you and say, well, the district-wide plan calls for this, but this isn't going to work. You know, Amanda Hiller, or this isn't going to work at Cartuga J. Here's why. You know, and you may say, okay, your plan can be different as to those components. So, you know, it is a good exercise to look at it, regardless of this law.
But by its very nature, this also opens up school boards to be readily named in lawsuits on instances concerning safety. Is that
Among the most readily named people, boards around here.
Anyway, but doesn't this open the door even wider as far as justification for a school board to be named?
If something goes wrong in any of your schools, the board's going to get sued. It just is. So.
What this does, though, it makes us, we're going to it now.
We did give them something else to look at.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Probably.
Here said that whoever we put secretary in the group is didn't worry about it. The minutes are literally what action is taken. It doesn't have to be a word by word, who said what.
I gave our principals kind of a cheat sheet, but I told them, here's sort of almost verbatim what you said. Just here, laminate this and put it in a folder and tell them this is where you're keeping your minutes, and that needs to be in the office. And you know, if you can get anybody to show up and have a meeting. So.
Last thing, I think what we call the Gary Shields Memorial Legislation. This is Senate Bill 91.
that's Dan Moore, I'm sorry.
And I guess the rationale behind this is that if under statute it's expunged, it's as if it never happened. So you should never have to talk about it in trying to get a job. I will tell you that the human resources side of are we not going to have valuable information is the problem. Does it create a legal problem for us in terms of hiring and being liable for that hire? No, because there's a statute that says not only can we not ask, but we can be fined if we do ask. So I'm not concerned about liability. I am concerned about HR's ability to look into charges and different things that have been expunged. But we're not supposed to ask about it. They don't have to tell us. Presumably, it says that the applicant need not, in answer to any question concerning the arrest, include a reference to information on a conviction that's been expunged. Need not. Well, what if the applicant does? We're okay. If they volunteer, it's almost like disability law. We can't say to somebody, are you disabled, and they'll be able to do the job. But if we say, can you do the essential functions of the job, and they say, well, I have narcolepsy, and I fall asleep every half hour, and you're going to need to accommodate me. We haven't violated anything, because the applicant volunteered that information in the job interview. Well, here, if a job applicant says, yeah, you know, I had 75 kilos of cocaine, but I got that expunged. You know, they've offered it. So, you know, at that point, I think it can be considered in decisions. But we are to tell them, do not tell us. We, you know, we're to make it clear that they need not provide that information.
But I think through that section 15A-145.4, there is a list. You can always do a criminal background check. There's a list that they're not going to expunge. Make sure
Yes.
they're not going to expunge.
Yeah, and those are the most serious offenses, which is the
Yes.
good news.
Yeah, the
Absolutely.
cocaine,
Sex
meth, and
offenses, the drug, right, the controlled
So-
substances, assaults.
Well, I was afraid that they're going to try to block us from going back to do the criminal search, but you're saying that's not true. We can go back and do the criminal search.
Right, and
Background.
correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's expunged, it should not show up on a
Show
criminal
up.
check.
Right, but I think the hardcore felony things cannot be expunged.
Exactly, so we're fine there.
So I think, and I didn't know that when I was having heartbeats about this.
Oh, I got you. Right, so when you look at what could be, expungement, folks, really is mistakes made when you're a minor. That is really, I think, where it is used most often,
I think so.
And rightly so,
Yeah.
unless it's the heinous type situation where you get in. But then again, there's people beyond 18 who have things that expunged.
Right.
But there's a certain area you can't have expunged. That made me sleep a little bit.
Good. Well, let me leave you with Obamacare, okay? And you can read this later. I'm not going to go through all this, but let me just tell you where we are. The Obama administration, Department of Labor, they have put off the requirement of the healthcare mandates until January 1 of 2015. So it will not apply until 2015, January 1. However, there will be a look-back period in determining who is eligible. And the government will look back anywhere from 6 months to a year. I think most people think it's not going to be any longer than 6 months. But what they're going to be looking back at is, did you have an employee that worked 30 or more hours a week on average? Any employee who works 30 or more hours a week on average is entitled to health care. Now, the good news is we already do that for employees, that the ones that are at 30 hours a week already get it. Where we got to be careful is employees that we've hired for less to make sure that they don't particularly work longer, than they should. But that's where the cutoff is, at that 30 hours or more.
Right now.
Because don't they get prorated health benefits over 20? Yeah. Now, a question I don't know the answer to is, does the Affordable Health Care Act require them to a higher level of coverage than they've been getting if they were working 30 hours a week? Because it was prorated, and now they'll be entitled to full health coverage at 30 hours. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That I think we're waiting to find out too. So we're just going to have to watch that. Most folks are just going to wait and see what happens, because they're still working through the rules on all this.
Okay, now the teachers, when you talk about 20 hours, you talk about hours, you're talking about the hourly wage people.
Now, I'm talking about any employee. The teachers already have, because they work, the 40 hours a week.
But if we employ a tutor, it needs to be 20 hours or less. Or if it's beyond that, they will get benefits. Is that what you just said?
If they're employed to work more than 20 or more hours a week, they get prorated health benefits already. What's new with Obamacare is health coverage across America for any employee working 30 or more hours a week on average. So that, that's an across-the-board change, but we've always given prorated health coverage to employees that we employ over 20 hours a week.
I think the retired people, I think through Blue Cross, Humana, something has taken over that arena. There was 3 categories in there. There's a 70-30. I used to be 80-20. I think I go to 70-30. There's a word in there now that has advantage on it or somewhere like that. What I'm reading down at the bottom, you better check with your provider to make sure they recognize this. And what I understand is my provider, I'm going to go see him, doesn't recognize the system that I'm on.
Yeah, and that's a different, do they accept, the coverages, are they part of the system?
Yeah, and
And some physicians are bowing out of some and wanting to be paid in full for services and not take insurance payments. It's an interesting hodgepodge. The good news for schools is I think this is going to be, there'll be some more guidance, and I think there'll be a lot of guidance out of DPI. The harder one is community colleges because of adjuncts. And you've got adjuncts that can show you that to be an adjunct, they've had to log more than 30 hours a week to be an adjunct. And community colleges are now going to have to really kind of rein in the hours that an adjunct can work. And the Department of Labor, I think, is going to approach Obamacare just like it approaches the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you've got an employee and you told that employee, do not work more than 40 hours a week, and they work 42 hours, you got to pay them 2 hours of overtime. Next week, they work 45. You got to pay them 5 hours of overtime. Next week, they work 50. You got to pay them 10 hours of overtime. Even though you've told them they cannot work more than 40, the Department of Labor says it's your job to enforce the hourly requirement, and you need to fire that employee if you're tired of paying them overtime. It's called suffering them working the extra hours. I think they're going to apply the same rule to Obamacare, because I've had systems say, well, can we tell employees they're not allowed to work over this many hours and get them to sign something? I said, well, you can get them to sign whatever you want, but if they in fact work more than what they're allowed to continuously, if they go over that 30 hours, then you're going to have to pay. And I think that's the concern, is right now you've got some employees that are over 20 that they're prorated. If they hit 30, then it's a full benefit, I think is what we got to figure out.
Do you know of anybody trying an independent contractor approach to
Yes.
borderline employees?
And here's what I think is going to happen there. Let's say, take an easy one, take custodians. You're going to outsource it. You're going to hire a company to do all your custodian. And the reason you're doing that is you don't want to pay the benefits. Well, if that custodian works more than 30 hours for that custodian, a premium, they're going to say, I'm sorry, we can no longer give you these folks at $12 an hour. They're now $15 an hour because we got to pay the health premium. So there's a lot that's, outsourcing sounds good, but I'm having some districts tell me that they really do think it's cheaper to just hire people at 30 hours a week and pay them benefits rather than even trying to outsource it, because they can pay the employee less than what they had to pay the staffing agency. Staffing agency wants $15 an hour, we can get away with $9 an hour. And benefits, we're still better off than we are through the staffing agency. So there's going to be a lot of math going on in the next couple of years to figure this out.
When you use the word work, what constitutes work? If a secretary to school does their 8 hours, then they're getting the 40 hours, and they've chosen or selected to do gate duty and stuff, is that work?
Right, and we've covered that with Dan. Your employees can volunteer. And there's a volunteer form, and you may need to brush it off and take a look at it again. But your employees can truly volunteer, but if they're being directed to do something, that's where we got to take a hard look at everything.
What if they volunteer and we volunteer to give them a little stipend?
That's okay.
Okay.
As long as it's a true stipend. And the Department of Labor used to say, and so you've been around long enough, you know that used to not be okay.
Right.
Remember, there was a period of time that Johnny and I were telling you couldn't use teacher assistants for anything because of the Department of Labor. They've come full circle on that. The Department of Labor says if a TA is truly volunteering to coach or something, then you're fine. You can't volunteer to do what you're paid to do, though. Like a bus driver still cannot volunteer to be a bus driver. That's
Can a teacher assistant volunteer to be a bus driver?
yes. But I've always said I don't volunteer to drive the buses if we can avoid it. I'd rather have somebody paid and insurance.
But could we, if they want to drive the bus, can we pay them? We have to pay them overtime? Do anybody get them?
Well-
Pay them overtime?
The other thing, your workers' comp figures into that. Plus, can you volunteer for a full-time position? I think there's a difference between the TA saying, I'll drive the activity bus over to Asheville this one time.
What about if it's substituting on a yellow bus?
Yeah, see, I think that's too akin to a job.
What's that?
The Department of Labor would say you don't volunteer for jobs. You don't volunteer. I had a superintendent one time actually volunteer to be superintendent because he wanted to contract back through a private company or it was did not want the there was that provision that you couldn't make so much money over your retirement. So he said, well, I'll just be principal. It was principal. I'll be principal for free. I said, no, that's a paid job. You really can't volunteer for what we consider to be a paid job.
There's no way in your right mind would say volunteer and superintendent in the same sentence.
There's no way to get around. We've got teacher assistants that want to drive a bus, substitute for buses, for bus drivers and that sort of thing. We need substitute bus drivers. Is there any way we can get around overtime?
Not that the Department of Labor is going to say that's dual job right there. That's just not volunteering for one day for one day.
See, they get upset at us because we can't allow them to drive.
Because you can't afford the overtime.
We can't afford it. But they say other counties are doing it and this sort of thing.
I mean, we can look at it. The other counties are doing it, doesn't hold me water.
We've never been able to find another county that
yeah,
does
that's the
it.
other thing. Where is that other county? It's probably in South Carolina.
But if you combine that job, if a TA was, let's just say, working at their job for 5 hours and driving the bus for 3 hours, that's one job, right? I mean, that's okay.
Chris, we're kind of in the wheelhouse of this. There's something in session 1 2000 in the budget that I found a little confusing. This is local boards of education and teachers employed by the local board may mutually modify the terms to make that teacher part-time. Is that to address that IRS situation, where they said you could, the prearranged
Or the 30 hours a week,
yeah,
or what have you.
You know why they did that?
I think they would say we just want to give you ultimate flexibility. That if you can save money by having part-time teachers, then we're going to let you do it. We're going to make it clear.
But then it says that the employee who enters into a part-time contract is not a teacher. So to me, it almost sounds like they're trying to pull that switcheroo to say this is not the same job duties as they had before they came back part-time.
I think what they mean by that is the protections and everything else that go with it. That you're almost like an at-will. You can be an at-will teacher part-time, is what I think they were getting at with that, which is I have the same concern. If you had somebody be willing to do that, and I think maybe what they're thinking is maybe with retired teachers, you could get them to come back on a part-time basis and save money.
I think you had something to do with this. With T.C. Robinson, negligence in death alleged.
With the student that was run over by the gators.
What was, I see what was proposed in here, Tom, Baldwin, there doing. Would you propose if we have this, that any school that has this type of ATV activity with students driving, that we get a policy quick, or is it up to, or doing it to school level or the board level?
Well, I think you've got to do what you feel comfortable. That was obviously an extremely tragic event that happened. And what the board decided to do in response to it was say that only licensed employees with driver's licenses would be able to drive those vehicles and students would not. What I would do is exactly where we started. This is a great full circle. I'd ask you, superintendent, to look into it. What are the schools doing? How often do we have those vehicles? How often are they used? Is there a reason why students need to be able to drive them? Or is it just a convenience? And we'd be better off saying students aren't allowed to drive them, period.
But didn't y'all do an ATV training where they could drive them?
I think that the policy does say that the person has to be trained in the vehicle to be able to drive.
The policy that you're describing does not allow students to drive, period.
I got to go back and look at the policy because it's been a while.
We did a little quick check.
See what we can pull it up right here.
I am going to leave.
We're done, yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Deb.
much.
And also, I know Missy was checking her. I think this was a,
While you're here, adjourn.
yeah, I was going to say, this was a continuation, so we need
We gotta
to,
vote on that fund redistribution.
Okay.
that we carried over.
What's
Do we
the,
have an answer on that?
I did talk to Mr. Maslin earlier, and Mr. Corbin is actually doing musical theater, so Mr. Brown is actually, when he moved into chorus, or from chorus to band, he's doing band and chorus as a kind of combination class.
I make a
So
motion to
he-
accept your thing.
The motion second to accept the fund distribution. All in
I do,
favor?
because she's saying it's all together, I just didn't want it to be.
Well, your point was well taken.
Okay.
Who's gonna take some? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn,
Make a motion to adjourn, school board meeting.
the continuation. A motion to adjourn and I have a second. All in favor, so by saying aye. Any opposed? So moved. Thank y'all for coming. Thank you.
Has to be identified.